This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
The London Assembly is the voice of London, composed of 25 members elected at the same time as the Mayor in order to hold him to account and to scrutinise his policies. Can I welcome members, officers and the public here in the gallery and watching on the webcast. This is a Mayor's Question Time meeting of the Assembly, which means that all members are invited to attend and ask questions of the Mayor. In case of an emergency and any need to exit this building, guests seated in the public gallery should follow the security staff and Assembly members should follow the meeting clerk. Please may I remind you to silence your devices, and can I ask the Mayor and members to position their microphones so that they can be heard clearly, moving it closer to you by picking it up from the base if required. Don't pick it up by the neck. Members are reminded that any electronic devices should not be placed in front of microphones, which must be turned on to speak and turned off once finished. Members are also reminded to turn off any mobile hotspots for the duration of the meeting, and that also goes for the public gallery, and I'm sorry for that, but there are some technical issues which means that I have to request that. Can I also ask the clerk, Rebecca Arnold, to confirm any apologies for their absence?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies today from Assembly Member Duval and Assembly Member Rogers.
Can I welcome to the public gallery students from St Lawrence University, New York? Well, you're very welcome. That's some bus trip. And since the last all-assembly member meeting at the plenary on the 7th of September, as part of an investigation into how the design of social housing has changed over the years, the Planning and Regeneration Committee examined whether the Mayor and the government prioritise cost of social housing over design and aesthetics. As part of an investigation on building safety, the Fire, Resilience and Emergency Planning Committee joined the London Fire Brigade on a fire safety inspection visit to a residential building in Bermondsey, and for the second of two meetings investigating London's waters, the Environment Committee discussed how the Thames could be used to produce renewable energy for the city. Can I ask the Assembly to note the interests set out in item 2? And do Assembly members have any other disclosable pecuniary interests which relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, or any other relevant interests, including in declarations in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not reflected in the authority's register of gifts and hospitality? This is where it goes. Oh, noted. That was a good, unusual. Now we go on to, can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 7th of July to the 31st of August 2023. And the Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, everyone. We've recently seen the return of London schools following the summer holidays. For many parents, this can be a stressful time, juggling work with caring responsibilities, meeting the cost of new school uniforms and adjusting to a different routine. But thankfully, one thing parents and carers of all state primary school children in London will no longer have to worry about is how their kids will eat during the school day. That's because for the first time ever, City Hall is funding free school meals for every child in our state primary schools. This emergency intervention will ensure no primary school pupil goes hungry in our classrooms, and will save parents upwards of £440 over the course of the academic year. As someone who benefited from free school meals growing up, I know the difference they can make. And I'm incredibly proud to be able to give back to the city that gave so much to me by providing this helping hand for the next generation, ensuring they can focus and thrive in the classroom. Chair, I've also written to the Housing Secretary this week to call on the government to provide urgent clarity on its proposed requirement for buildings over 18 metres to have a second staircase. Without certainty on this issue, developers simply cannot commence redesign work with confidence, and there's a risk the industry will have to down tools while it waits. We've made huge progress in London since 2016, completing more new homes for Londoners than at any time since the 1930s. But we still have a long way to go to fix the housing crisis, and we can't afford this confusion to slow down housing delivery in our city. Chair, I've been asked for one oral update, which I'll give before answering the main questions. The request for oral updates from Senator Caroline Russell on the Defence and Security Equipment International Arms Fair at Excel. I've made previous statements regarding my strong opposition to the Defence and Security Equipment International show being held at the Excel Centre. The promotion and sale of military equipment at the show does not reflect London's values. London is home to thousands who have fled conflict and suffered as a result of weapons like those displayed and sold at the Defence and Security Equipment International show. I've personally made representations to both the organisers of the event and Excel Centre management about their decision to continue to hold this event in the Royal Docks, and I joined the Mayor of Newham in my continued opposition to it. The GLA does not have the powers to stop the event proceeding, and it's inevitable that an event of this scale will have an impact on the local area and public transport. TfL works closely with Excel on all large events to ensure that the additional visitors and the general public remain safe and that the transport system is appropriately managed to cope with additional demand. Thank you, Chair.
There are no supplementaries on that, in which case we now move to the questions on the priority order paper. Each group is allocated an amount of time to ask their questions that is proportionate to their size. Sometimes that's not very apparent to the public gallery, so it's important to state that. The first question is number 2023-3399. Why do I bother with these very long numbers? Fairness, from Assembly Member Hall.
Thank you, Charles. I'll call it question 1.
It's so much easier.
Fairness is a thread that runs through all my decision-making as Mayor. When I was elected Mayor, I made a promise that I'd be a Mayor for all Londoners, regardless of their background, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation or class. London is the greatest city in the world, but we still suffer from significant levels of inequality with some of the most deprived wards and neighbourhoods in the country. That's why it's important that we make sure that the decisions we make at City Hall narrow inequalities to make the city a fairer place. Our universal free school meals programme will ensure that all primary school children will have at least 1 square meal a day. It means that children of all backgrounds will be able to concentrate in class and fulfil their potential. And we've built record levels of affordable housing, including council housing, to help everyone to have a decent place to call home. We've helped food charities through our Food Routes funding. We've supported young black men into employment with our workforce integration network. We've supported over 110,000 young people with our £70 million Young Londoners Fund. Last year we saw 200,000 people attend a free skills course thanks to decisions from City Hall. We've put £44 million into our academies programme to help Londoners into good jobs in health, social care, digital, the green economy and hospitality. All these are examples of my commitment to fairness, which have helped to support those communities left behind and worst hit by government austerity. I also make no apologies for being tough on crime and its causes, whilst working to restore trust and confidence in the Met Police Service within communities that have often been underprotected. It was clear to me that the previous Commissioner was not able to grapple with this issue. The new Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner are, and I continue to both support and challenge them where appropriate. Finally, the ULEZ expansion to the whole of London will now mean that 5 million more Londoners will breathe cleaner air, not just those who live in inner or central London. The majority of the poorest Londoners don't own a car, and yet the worst off breathe in the worst air. The ULEZ itself promotes social justice and fairness, and having ensured the least well-off have access to the initial scrappage fund, I made the decision to widen the scope and increase the scrappage scheme funding so all Londoners could access support. Ultimately, everything we do at City Hall is to make the city a fairer, greener, safer and more prosperous place for all Londoners, regardless of background.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. On the subject of fairness, how much money have you made so far from your ULEZ expansion in the 16 days since it came in?
Chair, I've not got that data. There will be a report shortly after a month with data about compliance. I'm not sure the 1 month on report gives figures in relation to, from previous reports, monies raised, but if the previous schemes in central London and inner London did, so will the wider expansion. I think what we've tried to do is be consistent.
Well, I think Londoners would like to know up to £40 million of revenue in 16 days alone, according to one analysis that we've read. Do you think it's actually fair to take money from those who can least afford it, especially to the tune of what we believe is around £40 million?
I don't recognise that figure. It should be said, it's in the public domain, that actually what TfL have been doing when it comes to enforcement notices is giving warning letters and not fines in the first few weeks. So I'm not sure where that figure comes from. And that's the same practice, by the way, TfL applied when it came to the ULEZ in central London in 2019, the expansion to inner London in 2021, and now the expansion to outer London from August 29th, 2023.
Yes, but of course so many people are so unhappy about this, and I've been meeting people across London, Mr. Mayor, over the past few months. Unlike you, I've been knocking on very, very many doorsteps and listening to people. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I met 2 ladies in Enfield. One was 78, the other one was 82. Both of them have got cars that are non-compliant. The cars have got very little mileage on them. They both said to me they both had hoped those cars would see them out, to use their term. They use buses most of the time, but they cannot carry their food on the bus because it's too heavy, so they need their cars once a week. And now they have to pay £12.50 every week to you in order that they can do their shopping. Do you think that's fair?
Well, Chair, there is now a scrappage scheme that covers every single Londoner, including those who weren't previously eligible, those in low income, disabled, small businesses and so forth. So I'd encourage the member, if she's not already done so, to ask the two women in Enfield to speak to TfL. I'm more than happy to take the case offline if it helps to ensure that the two people that the member's talking about receive the support to ensure that their vehicles, if they're non-compliant, can be compliant by use of the scrappage scheme.
Yes, we know how far £2,000 goes, don't we, Mr Mayor? I also spoke to a builder who has had to go into debt to replace his vehicle. If he hadn't, he would have lost his business. All his mates are in the same position. Do you think that that's fair, that these small businesses are having to take on such debt?
Well, Chair, as a result of our announcement to widen the scrappage scheme, we had support from both Business London and the London Chamber of Commerce, and we worked closely with the Federation of Small Businesses to widen the scrappage scheme because it was clear that the original sum of money may have caused some inconvenience in relation to the difference between buying a new vehicle, £5,000, and the cost of a new ULEZ compliant vehicle. We've increased the amount of support small businesses, micro businesses receive, and also increased the amount of money that goes towards a van, and then also various exemption periods as well. Again, if it's the case that the small business person she's speaking to hasn't got the right support, I'm more than happy going to ask TfL to take that offline.
People are having to take on loans, Mr Mayor. People are having to take on loans on businesses that they cannot afford in order to continue to trade. But I met one woman in Hatch End who's actually lost her fruit and vegetable business because of your ULEZ. Do you think that that is fair?
Chair, it's because we were concerned that some Londoners may miss out that we announced a widening of the scrappage scheme to make sure people receive support. It's just worth reminding colleagues that it's the poorest Londoners least likely to own a car and suffer the worst consequences, and that's one of the reasons why this policy addresses the issue of social injustice and indeed racial injustice, because it's black, Asian, minority ethnic Londoners who disproportionately suffer more as a consequence of poor air quality. We have tried to ameliorate some of the concerns that Londoners have, whether you're an individual in a family, a micro business, a small business, a charity, or anybody else. And there's still, I understand, around £80–90 million worth of support left. So I'd encourage Londoners to please take advantage of the scrappage scheme. Again, a scheme provided without a penny of support from the government.
There's other issues as well around this, which we all know. I met a lady on the Jubilee line the other day on my way home. She lives in Stanmore. She is elderly and relies on her cleaner. Her cleaner comes in from outside London but has given up the job because her car was non-compliant, therefore doesn't have to come into London. I've heard the same sort of stories from others and from carers that aren't now coming into London. Do you think that's fair to those people?
Well, no, I don't think it's fair. Those in the home counties haven't got a penny support from the government, notwithstanding.
No, is it fair to the people that rely on them in London? We told you this would happen.
Well, one of the reasons why we've been lobbying the government to give support to London and the South East is because we understand the difference that made when the government gave support to Birmingham, Bristol, Portsmouth, Bath, and elsewhere across the country. What I said to the councils in the home counties who had spent more than £1 million taking TfL to court unsuccessfully, wasted on lawyers' fees and court fees, wouldn't it be better to use some of that effort, energy and money to lobby the government to treat London and the South East the same way as they rightly treat other parts of the country? Had they worked with me to lobby the government, there's still time to do so. We can ensure those who live outside London can receive the support they need to come into London. We have been working closely with the care sector and the member will be pleased to know that the care sector, those who represent care workers, were also pleased by the expansion of the scheme we're able to do.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr Mayor, but I've spoken to very many people. I spoke to somebody in Bexley the other day. His father-in-law has to drive to his son's house to swap cars, because they live outside London, in order to see a close relative in hospital. Again, that's not fair, is it? There are so many different examples of people, and we're all hearing the same thing on the doorstep. It isn't fair. You have imposed this.
I've explained the reasons why the ultra-low motion zone was brought in. It's not fair. Around 4,000 premature deaths a year. It's not fair. Children with stunted lungs forever. It's not fair. Adults with a whole host of health issues from asthma to cancer, dementia to heart disease. It's not fair. That 70% of those who earn below £10,000 don't own a car, yet suffer the worst consequences of air quality. It's not fair. That those who live on the main roads tend to be black, Asian, Irish ethnic, and they suffer the worst consequences. We've tried to ameliorate some of the issues by widening the scrappage scheme.
It is not fair that traders, small businesses are going into big debt because they're having to replace their vehicles, all because of your ULEZ expansion. I know how they feel. I started a small business. I know what it's like to pour your heart and soul into a small business. Do you think that it's actually fair that you're destroying people's lives' work? And you are.
Well, Chair, I've also run a very successful small and medium business, and other pressures there are on those businesses. Also, other pressures when people are phoning sick because of a consequence of a respiratory problem. When your staff are rushed home because their children have had an asthma attack and they need support. I've seen the consequences of those hard-working staff.
You're not listening to the issues of Londoners, Mr. Mayor. I am. I'm knocking on doors. I've been listening to them. I know what they're going through. And let me tell you, as Mayor, I would stand up for them and I would stop the ULEZ expansion on day one of a mayoralty and make the streets safer, because London deserves better. Would you not think that that's correct? Londoners deserve better at the moment.
Well, the Londoners have a choice. They could vote for a candidate who's going to scrap all the ULEZ schemes, scrap the congestion charge, and take us back to the toxic air we had in yesteryear, or a mayor who invests in people, whether it's free school meals or cleaning up the air, but supports people make that a transition. As long as I'm mayor, I will tackle the air pollution crisis, I will tackle climate change, and I will support
Londoners. As long as you're mayor, you're not listening to the people in outer London who do not want this. I mean, you say you're fair and forthright with Londoners. Why then are you being investigated by the monitoring officer for dishonesty?
Chair, as the member will know, there are many complaints made against me from Conservatives, whether they're cabinet ministers, whether they're members of Parliament, whether they're members of the Assembly, and it's right and proper when complaints are made, they're investigated by the monitoring officer. I think it's improper for me to comment on an investigation when it is alive, and I'm surprised somebody who aspires to the highest office in London would not want due process to take place. So far, all the complaints made by members of the Tory cabinet, members of Parliament, and members of the Assembly over the last 7 years, and there's been dozens and dozens and dozens, have not been upheld. What I've not done, Chair, is comment on those because I think it's unwise for people to comment on a process that's still in course.
Perhaps you'll comment on this then. You said at Mayor's question time last October that you hadn't seen the ULEZ consultation results. In September last year, you were briefed on the ULEZ consultation results. So what you said to the London Assembly in October wasn't true, was it?
Well, Chair, as I understand, that's one of the issues the members complained about to the monitoring officer, which will be looked into. I'm quite clear. The first time I saw the full report, which set out the analysis of the consultation, was a few years before I made the decision to expand the ULEZ. I understand that's one of the issues that have been complained about by the Conservatives to the monitoring officer. It's right and proper.
I should think everybody should be complaining, because when we ask you things in this chamber, we expect to be told the correct answer. I'll put it that way. I'll leave it at that.
Chair,
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I've been asked about honesty. It's really important to say I've not lost my job because of lying to the House of Commons, like her friend Boris Johnson.
Can we just keep this on you for a change, Mr. Mayor? It is Mayor's question time. You need to start taking responsibility for that you are responsible for, not forever throwing things at everybody else. Just try taking responsibility, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Well, Chair, sauce for the goose has got to be sauce for the gander, and the member may not like that her former friend and leader is a liar, but he is.
Assembly Member Cooper, you'd like to come in.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to focus on this issue about fairness, and I wondered if you thought that encouraging employers to pay the London living wage, would you say that that is fair to try and increase the national minimum wage to the London living wage? And yet there is someone present in this room who said this would be the most damaging to the lowest skilled and lowest paid, whose skills and value to the employers do not meet the London living wage.
Well, that's clearly doesn't understand the cost of living crisis Londoners face. I just remind colleagues it was the Labour Party that campaigned for a national minimum wage in 1987, opposed by the Conservatives. Since I've been mayor since 2016, we've increased fivefold the number of employees paying the London living wage. Deputy Mayor Joan McCartney sits on the commission. I'm incredibly proud. More and more employees are paying the London living wage. Somebody who aspires to represent Londoners, for them to be discouraging employees paying the London living wage beggars belief. I think it's unfair. One of the reasons why those people aren't fit to look after Londoners' interests.
And on another point about fairness, would you say that someone who aspires to the highest office in this city should describe, for example, the Notting Hill Carnival as something that is full of black Londoners, and that there's a problem with crime amongst black Londoners, and that the Carnival is dangerous?
Well, can I just address the issue of the Carnival, because it's got a lot of attention recently from some people with their own interests in this matter. The history of the Carnival, the Notting Hill Carnival, and where it takes place is rooted in the discrimination the Windrush generation faced in the 1950s and early 60s. It was in response to allegations of police brutality and discrimination that those Londoners of West Indian origin decided to have a carnival deliberately in that part of London where they lived, where the slums were. And the carnival has a rich history, a community-led carnival. More than 2 million people attended the carnival this year. I'll make this point: per capita, per 10,000 people who attend the carnival, there are as many arrests at the carnival as there are, for example, at Reading Festival, at Glastonbury. There are more arrests per capita at the Euro finals at Wembley. Nobody's suggesting we ban England from playing at Wembley. Why should we ban those people who organise the carnival from having a carnival in Notting Hill?
Absolutely, Mr. Mayor. Finally, on the issue of spending money wastefully, we have mentioned the previous Mayor of London, who wasted an awful lot of money on Garden Bridge. Do you think that was fair to Londoners, or indeed the water cannon, or the list is quite long?
The way I think it's really important to understand that the money we have is taxpayers' money. We held it in trust for taxpayers, need to spend it prudently. I think the Garden Bridge was a vanity project. It was unfair to waste more than £40 million of Londoners' hard-earned taxpayers' money on a vanity project. I understand the previous mayor was aspiring to be the Conservative leader, and being tough on crime by buying water cannons may have been a smart thing to do to win that election. But the idea of buying these second-hand water cannons, which the Home Secretary of the time had not approved, that was second-hand and had been, for a good reason, written off by the Germans who originally used them, again, is another waste of taxpayers' money. And I think it's unfair to waste taxpayers' money that way.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Hall, did you?
Yes, thank you. If I'm going to be quoted, could I suggest, please, that an entire quote is given, not just portions of one? If not, I will start playing that game with the Mayor, and believe you me, it will not be pleasant. So can I just say that, Chair?
Okay.
In fact, I think I did just say that, and I meant it.
Thank you. We're done on that question. So let's now go to Assembly Member Russell, who wants to speak about the feasibility study into public toilets on the TfL network.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your continued interest in this matter. I'm proud to serve at one of the most diverse cities in the world. With that comes a responsibility to ensure we're doing everything we can to make sure everyone travelling within it can do so safely and with confidence. For some customers, being able to access toilets can be a key factor in whether they feel able to use public transport. And while improvements have been made in recent years and continue to be made, there is still more that can be done. There are now around 320 toilets available to customers across 145 sites on the TfL estate. Recent extensions to the network have enabled additional facilities to be installed as new stations and upgrade projects have opened. New accessible toilets are available at both the new stations at Battersea Power Station and Nine Elms, as well as the new entrance at Bank. All East and West section Elizabeth Line stations have customer toilets, and in the central section, customer toilets are available at Abbeywood and Farringdon stations, with wheelchair-accessible toilets also available at Custom House, Tottenham Court Road and Whitechapel. Last November, TfL confirmed at an assigned budget to improve toilets across its network that are most in need of repair, and at the time confirmed that it would be undertaking analysis to assess where there were gaps in accessible toilet provision, especially at stations with existing step-free access. However, I listened carefully to the representations of members of the Assembly from all sides, as well as the feedback provided in response to TfL step-free access consultation, and early this year asked TfL to start work on a more comprehensive feasibility study into improving and expanding toilet provision across its network. Early this month, TfL shared the feasibility study's terms of reference with the Assembly via the chair of the Health Committee, as well as an indicative timeframe for completion. The study is exploring customer requirements and the condition of existing facilities, as well as opportunities to expand and improve future provision. This work is well underway, and I know the TfL officers would be happy to meet with members to discuss this work further. TfL is aiming to complete this study by the end of February.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm really glad that the feasibility study now has a completion date. It was disappointing that it took 7 months simply to get that feasibility study started. It felt at the time like the feasibility study was a bit of a delaying tactic, and then that got further delayed. So delayed that I actually checked out TfL's own data with my report, the London Loo League Table, which is an in-depth look at the gaps in toilet provision on the TfL network. I found less than a quarter of stations in zones 1 to 3 have toilets, and the Northern Line is the worst on the Underground. Only a quarter of stations, or just over a quarter of stations, has a toilet. So do you agree that it is wrong that so many TfL stations have no toilets?
Yeah, can I say, I really think this is a serious matter. It really isn't, anything I'd take lightly. And just to understand how serious it is, if you overlay the lack of toilet facilities, it links with the lack of step-free. It's a coincidence, some would say, but I think it's a fact and a consequence of lack of foresight. On the Northern Line, which I know very well, from Elephant and Castle to Morden, no step-free, no loos either.
Yep.
On the other side, from London Bridge to Morden, on Northern Line, same issue. So I accept the premise of the arguments, and I promise the feasibility study is a proper piece of work, and I'm really happy for you to feed into that as well.
Thank you. I mean, a lot of people tell me that lack of access to a toilet prevents them from even using the TfL transport network. Now, my report picked up on the fact that only a quarter of stations has an accessible toilet. Accessible toilets, they are needed at every station, and it's not just the ones that are already step-free. Do you agree that the gap in provision of accessible toilets needs to be tackled?
Yes, but one of the reasons for the delay in the feasibility work being sent to the Assembly was because of resources, lack of TfL resources, just doing the feasibility terms of reference. So we're waiting from the government for capital for 23-24, and then we've got to negotiate a deal for capital for 24-25 and a long-term capital deal. That limits TfL's ability in relation to further improvements. So I've got to be honest in relation to... No,
I do get that, Mr. Mayor. The thing is, in the terms of reference that I've now seen, I don't see the accessibility point adequately reflected, but I'll raise that with the officers when I meet them shortly. Now, just last week, the Assembly agreed cross-party to call on you to have a sufficient programme of investment in toilets in next year's budget. So when are you going to make the investment that Londoners so urgently need in new toilets on the TfL network?
I've got to be frank with Londoners. Unless there's a capital settlement with the government, there probably won't be the improvements Londoners need in relation to either step-free or toilets. Just to be clear, for this year, 23-24, we're about £200 million short in capital. There's then a long-term capital deal. The government have agreed to the principle and to give this set of ministers and DfT credit. They're working collegially with TfL, but I've got to be frank in relation to the lack of resources we have in terms of capital investment.
I understand that, but actually just getting on and doing what you can is really, really important, and finding some money has got to be possible. The thing is, these toilets, they're not an extra, they are fundamental, and building them would be a huge relief to Londoners. I've got no further questions.
Can I appreciate, Chair, the way the questions are asked, and we'll take this away to see what more we can do.
The next question is from Assembly Member Ahmed, and it concerns universal free school meals.
Well, Chair, the member will be incredibly proud, bearing in mind her campaigning over the last year on this important issue. Last week was one of my proudest as Mayor. On a visit to a London primary school, I met pupils who can now enjoy and are enjoying free nutritious lunches every school day this year. Nearly 300,000 families across London will have one less bill to worry about during the cost of living crisis. They could save upwards of £440 per child over the year, one of the reasons why she should be so proud. Free school meals bring benefits for mental health, and our research suggests this could have most impact for children in low-income families. In areas where universal provision has been rolled out, we've also seen a boost in attainment levels. Children attending schools in areas with universal free school meals make 4 to 8 weeks more progress in maths and English than pupils in other comparable areas. Children's diet quality is also likely to improve as meals meet national school food standards. Unfortunately, only 2% of packed lunches meet these. The evidence from previous pilots in London boroughs indicated a 23% increase in children eating vegetables. Research shows that for every £1 invested in healthy school meals, £1.71 could be delivered in increased educational outcomes, better health outcomes and long-term economic benefits. I also remember having to queue up for my free school meal token and sitting separately from my friends who weren't receiving free school meals. Making free school meals universal reduces stigma and boosts take-up amongst families who need them the most. We've worked closely with boroughs, schools and caterers as part of our formal governance structure. This has included roundtables, interviews, consultations, surveys, regular written updates and webinars, and Joanne McCartney has been pivotal in this piece of work. These partnerships are central to the success of the scheme. We continue to share practical resource via our online boroughs and schools hubs, including templates, guidance and digital resources. The latest polling from YouGov shows a third of parents of children between 5 and 11 are financially struggling, including going without basic necessities and going into debt to meet them. We couldn't just sit by and do nothing when we can help, so we are. Children shouldn't have to bear the brunt of the cost of living crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the initiative that you have taken. I was proud to be at a school this week where the children were telling me what it means to them to be able to have access to a free school meal and not have to queue separately for it. So I am incredibly proud of this administration for taking this initiative. Mr. Mayor, whilst you are doing all that you can to help Londoners through the cost of living crisis, shockingly, the Chancellor at this moment is thinking about cutting benefits during the cost of living crisis. At the same time, the Trussell Trust and Joseph Rowntree Foundation are highlighting how the universal credit falls short of what is needed for Londoners to afford the essentials such as food. Their Essentials Guarantee campaign calls on the government to ensure that people can afford the essentials and highlights how important your initiative is during this cost of living crisis. Mr. Mayor, will you support the Essentials Guarantee campaign?
I will, and I do support the campaign. But okay, can I just, the reason why the question is so important is Assemblyman Cooper reminded us about the difference the London living wage can make. A lot of those who are receiving benefits are working. They're doing the right thing, maybe doing 2 jobs, and still rely upon benefits to top up their salary. And we've seen in the media the government, the Chancellor's considering making benefit cuts to make tax cuts in advance of the next general election. Well, people benefiting from the tax cuts aren't going to be those who are really, really struggling. And you know, what I'd say to the government is, when you see polling that suggests 1 out of 3 Londoners are financially struggling, going without basic necessities, relying upon debt to pay the basic necessities, this is a wrong priority. And I think people realise this tax bung doesn't make up for austerity over the last 13 years or the benefits cuts they'll do to pay for them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And of course, you will have seen the DWP figures this week about benefits and the fact that 40% of Londoners who claim universal credit are actually in work, which is absolutely shocking. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, and thank you again for taking this initiative.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Bakari concerning the building safety crisis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. London will never forget the Grenfell Tower fire and the tragic loss of 72 lives. These deaths and the other terrible impacts of the fire were a result of the failings of a system of unclear rules and lax enforcement that allowed dangerous materials to be used on homes nationwide. The scale of the crisis uncovered since is deeply concerning, with thousands living in fear and many homes left unsellable. As the events of last few weeks with RAC have shown, it's not just cladding we need to think about. Systemic failures have led to different types of defects affecting homes and public buildings. The GLA housing team administers the cladding remediation funds for London on behalf of DLUC for buildings of 18 metres and above, engaging with building owners to work through the complex funding and remediation process. The administration of the scheme for unsafe cladding remediation of buildings of 11 to 18 metres has been delegated to Homes England. No one should have to pay for the defects they played no part in causing, and so I pushed for a developer levy so industry pays its fair share, which I'm pleased that Michael Gove has adopted. However, it remains the case that leaseholders living in blocks under 11 metres are left without any help, and this is unacceptable. Many of the levers to fix this sit with government, but I'm using my convening powers where I can. We published best practice guidance on how landlords should support residents through the EWS1 process. My Deputy Mayor Tom Copley recently met with End Our Cladding Scandal to discuss these issues, and my officers meet with the group quarterly to ensure we're hearing the latest from this community. All this has shown the importance of getting buildings right to begin with. The recent revelations about RAC concrete in our public buildings highlights the importance of proper investment, regular maintenance and safe refurbishment. On the 7th of August, my Deputy Mayor for Housing, Tom Copley, wrote to the Building Safety Minister asking what assessment the government intends to make of the risk of RAC in homes. He's yet to receive a response. I've not waited for the government to get this house in order on building safety, and have used my London plan and funding programmes to go further than the national regulations requiring sprinklers and a complete ban on combustible cladding on all new homes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Now, 6 years since Grenfell, we're still in a position that people across London are trapped in unsafe housing. Many developers have been handed new contracts without remediating impacted buildings that they're responsible for. Now, Mr Mayor, would you agree that this is wrong and the developers are being allowed to continue to make profit from these new projects while refusing to repair buildings with safety defects? Will you now support moves to blacklist non-compliant developers, something that the Levelling Up Secretary Michael Gove promised to do but has still not acted on?
Well, to be fair to Michael Gove, like me, he's keen to act within the law. What nobody wants to do is, with the best of intentions, do something which is unlawful, which allowed these developers that one would like to blacklist to bring a claim, and it would be perverse if they won damages on top of having the contracts. And so both the government and the GLA have got to act within the law, and that's frustrating for obvious reasons because we want to see change. I think, again, Michael Gove deserves credit because what he's trying to do is use the levers he has that are more than the GLA to try and get a change in action. But I think the basic premise of your question has to be right. Bad behaviour shouldn't be rewarded, and that's the genesis of your concern. And so we're doing what we can within the law. We always work with the government where it's possible to play tag with them, but I know your frustration and I share that, but you would criticise me rightly if I wasted taxpayers' money on damages paid to people who haven't done the right thing in the past.
Now, you mentioned RAC, and many parents, including myself, are really worried about this, and it's appalling that the government didn't act sooner. Now, there is concern that the concrete crisis could widen to other buildings, including libraries and other housing, and construction of social housing was between the 50s and 90s. So there's a risk that this could be increasing in number. So do you know a number of homes and municipal buildings in London that are likely to be impacted by this? And will you commit to maybe even a full investigation to find out?
Yeah, thanks for your question. I don't know why you're interested in this. It's really important that we are. So I've asked for a review of all the GLA estate. MPS, LFB, TfL also having a look at their estate as well. London councils and G15 have got the scale to do so, looking at their estate as well. For schools, as you know, the DfE finally published the list. We know 18 schools in London are on the DfE list. We think there are further 4 schools which may be affected that aren't on the DfE list. Some of these schools couldn't open, still aren't open. I spoke this week to the Fire Commissioner, who understands the seriousness of this issue. As soon as we have information subject to permission from the government, we'll make that public because it's important. We've sent a chaser to the government because we wrote to them 1st and 7th of August because you're right, people are concerned. Is their building affected? By the way, hopefully a lot of residential aren't affected because this sort of RAC was used for public buildings, but as soon as we know, we'll make that public.
Well, thank you, and I hope that there will be a full investigation into this. Now, the other thing is that Mr Michael Gove actually handed back £245 million designated to be spent on improving building safety because he couldn't find projects to spend it on. Now, I'm pretty shocked at that there were no projects in London that he could have found funding for. Mr Mayor, since that revelation, what representations have you made to the Secretary about this?
Yeah, we're surprised by that. We speak regularly to the government about what more they can do for London. We've asked for just, recently £2 billion to support our housing needs. I suspect what happened was various government departments were asked by the Treasury to return underspends, and rather than finding ways to spend the money that could be used sensibly, officials just handed it back to the Treasury. There's no guarantee that money will come back to that department next year. It beggars belief that, bearing in mind the huge need in housing, communities, local government, you've seen councils, for example, going bankrupt. The Secretary of State saw fit to give this money back to Treasury, and it may not see the light of day.
Thank you for your answers.
Thank you. Assembly Member Sheikh next on housing delivery in London.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. The London Plan is a robust planning framework for London that is working to deliver good growth and development in the right locations. In recent years, more homes have been completed in London than at any time since the 1930s. Since I became Mayor, average housing completions are 10,000 homes per year higher than under my predecessor. London Plan affordable housing policies have helped to increase the level of affordable housing in strategic applications to 45% in 2022 by habitable room, the highest since this was first recorded in 2011. The proportion of social and London affordable rent housing for households with the lowest incomes has also increased. Affordable housing in all eligible applications, including those that are not assessed by City Hall, has increased to an average of 36% annually over the last 3 years, up from 24% in 2016. For reasons best known to themselves, the government has chosen this moment to make unfounded claims in the press about the need to intervene in the London Plan. I've not received any formal notification, correspondence or direction from the government relating to these press comments. Putting the Prime Minister's media briefings aside, as part of normal planning processes, my team has already started the Planning for London programme, which is engaging with Londoners and stakeholders on how any future London plan should address the challenges facing our city. My Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development and the Executive Member for Housing and Planning at London Councils have reconvened the Housing Delivery Task Force, which will support housing delivery in London. I'm always open to working with the government to tackle issues impacting housing delivery in London. But rather than making political attacks on a successful London plan, the government should be clarifying its own position on planning reforms and building safety requirements so developers and investors can progress their schemes with confidence. In the current economic climate, experts are forecasting a decline in house building in the absence of meaningful government intervention. Last month, I wrote to the Secretary of State calling for additional funding to support housing delivery to levels that were agreed with the government as recently as 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning to you. And I think you've sort of covered the stats, really. They speak for themselves, which is why I found it so bizarre and confusing to witness the Prime Minister's comments in the media, which, they were so removed from reality. I wonder if he'd been given the wrong briefing before he stepped in front of the cameras. I would agree with you. I think the fact that they haven't even approached you in regards to the comments that they were making in media, for me, speaks to dysfunctional governance, and I think that's at the heart of the way the Conservatives have managed government for long enough now. So I wanted to ask you, in light of the fact that the comments made by our Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, were A, unfounded, B, incorrect in terms of the statistics, but I also just found it quite undermining of democratic process. Londoners go out and they vote, and we've got our elections coming up next year. They elect a mayor of London, and in legislation you have appropriate powers to set a London plan that then goes through a really extensive process and then goes to the government. And I just found it worrying that it may even begin to set a precedent to undermine the office of the Mayor of London and then therefore Londoners' democratic mandate. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit.
So, frankly speaking, for selfish reasons, I encourage Rishi Sunak to continue to lash out. Every time he speaks about London, my poll numbers go up. And so please, Mr. Prime Minister, speak up more in relation to what you think is going wrong in London, because when a man of inaction lashes out, you're onto something. And when you bear in mind it's this government that's got rid of housing targets across the country has the audacity to criticise an administration that's met the targets, the stretching targets set by the government. We've not thrown in the towel. It does beg a belief and shows a chutzpah not seen since a previous Prime Minister whose name ended with Johnson. And so, look, we're going to carry on doing what we're doing, which is delivering for Londoners, whether it's free universal meals for primary school kids, whether it's more council homes than the 1970s, more homes completed since the 1930s, investing in London. I do, though, want to work with the government. And so I'm hoping that Michael Gove, is far more sensible than his boss and works with us to deliver for Londoners.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I agree. It's as bizarre, isn't it? Getting rid of their own house building targets when you've not only met yours but exceeded it. For me, it just felt like a bit of a distraction again from a failing government. And actually, not only have you delivered on your targets and exceeded them, but you've changed the definition of affordable housing so that actually it becomes sometimes harder to build affordable homes, but it means that more Londoners have access to it. So honestly, I think the stats and the facts are on your side. And I'll just ask you to briefly end on a point of, you've said that you've written to the government for more funding. So if they want to start taking their job seriously and improving the lives of Londoners and giving you the support in order to do that, what more can they do?
There are a number of areas where we need government's support. Additional funding is clearly important in relation to building the genuinely affordable homes. We need particularly bear in mind the macroeconomic conditions that there exist. We need certainty. I gave the example in my opening about the second staircase issue. So what the government said in July was any building above 30 metres needed a second staircase. We then said to developers, you've got to abide by what they've said. The government then said recently it's going to be any building above 18 metres requires a second staircase. And that uncertainty has meant there are basically 34,000 potential new homes that have been paused because developers don't know which way the government's going. Should they build a second staircase when it's between 18 and 30 or only above 30? What are the technical requirements? Can you use the same parameters for a second staircase as a first staircase, and so forth? So that's one of my frustration with the government. And the third thing the government can do, which will really help, is to sort out the position in relation to the supply chain, because obviously not being in the EU has caused delays in relation to materials coming into the UK. So there are things they can do aside from the additional funds that will really make a difference.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's hope they're listening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next is Assembly Member Prince on the subject of taking responsibility.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your question. Being Mayor of London is a job I approach with the utmost seriousness and sense of responsibility. I've had to make some difficult decisions in my time in office, but that is what I was elected to do, and I'll never shy away from making the tough choices. And I take responsibility for the impacts of my policies on Londoners. I take responsibility for halving the level of toxic air in central London and reducing it by 21% in inner London, thanks to our transport and environmental policies. I take responsibility for the creation of tens of thousands of new, genuinely affordable homes for Londoners, thanks to our record-breaking delivery on affordable and council homes. I take responsibility for almost 300,000 additional state primary school children getting a good hot meal every school day, thanks to our £135 million emergency investment in universal free school meals. Over 110,000 young people are now being supported through our £70 million Young Londoners Fund, and 200,000 Londoners received free skills training last year, thanks to investing decisions from City Hall. Where there are challenges, I face up to them. I've helped reform the London Fire Service, appointing a new commissioner to implement the recommendations of the Grenfell Tower inquiry, and we continue to expose cultural issues so this reform can continue. I've worked to shine a light on systemic issues in the Metropolitan Police, ensuring we have a commissioner who will tackle cultural issues head-on. While I work to support and reform these vital services, it's important to be clear that 13 years of government austerity have had an impact on them, as well as on other public services in London. I've consistently funded the London Fire Brigade beyond the formula required by the government, and I've put direct funding into the Met Police Service that has put an extra 1,300 officers on our streets, and this year is funding 500 additional police community support officers. But these services still remain underfunded by the government. My role as Mayor is also to advocate for proper funding for our public services, and where appropriate, for devolution of power so we can run services more effectively from London. I want to commend, Chair, the very many dedicated officers and staff that work across the GLA and wider family in TfL, MOPAC, the development corporations, the London Fire Brigade, and of course the Met Police Service. Without their hard work and commitment, we would not have been able to achieve what we have from City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning. So, for example, Mr. Mayor, when one of your deputy mayors, sends an email, should the recipient assume that he or she is speaking on your behalf?
It's the context, depends what the email is. I'm not sure what the email is, but I've got 10 deputy mayors who probably in a week send hundreds of emails.
So perhaps I could ask a slightly different question. When someone writes an email or makes a decision as one of your deputies which you disagree with, how would you expect to deal with that situation, Mr. Mayor?
Well, anybody who works with me can't 100% of the time have views that are in agreement with me or do things that are in agreement with me. What we don't want is group thinking, and so what we encourage is discussion, debate, even argument within the team. Once the decision's been taken, that's the decision of the administration and my decision, but there's often disagreements, discussions, debate. That's what I want, and then we reach a position and we go forward. Deputy mayors, advisors, advice, and to paraphrase, I decide.
But ultimately, if there is a wrongdoing or a mistake, do you accept responsibility for that, Mr. Mayor? Do you own that as the chair, as the leader, indeed as the mayor of this great city? Do you accept the buck stops with you, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think in my main answer I gave an example of the Met Police Service, where I was quite clear in relation to my expectations. When they weren't being met, I was quite clear what needed to happen. So I'm quite clear in relation to what I expect from people who work with me, and that's the standards we expect, whether it's major infrastructure, whether it's a policing service, whether it's inside City Hall.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to build on what my colleague was saying, because I think what he's alluding to are the emails that went from Deputy Mayor Shirley Rodriguez to some of the academic institutes. So, you know what I'm like, I read things. I've got an example here. There was an evaluation paper on low emission zone that was due to be published in the Lancet, so a serious journal. And some of the findings of the review said this, and I'm quoting directly, that there was no evidence of a reduction in the proportion of children with small lungs or asthma symptoms over the period of the zone. It goes on to say that following implementation of London's low emission zone, there were small improvements in NO2 and NOx levels, but no improvements in PM10 levels. So this is the research they found in the paper. Now, the Deputy Mayor, who I think my colleague was suggesting you have ultimate responsibility for, didn't like this at all. And there was a note that went back to the academic body, and it said that Shirley had reviewed the paper and asked if there was any chance they could reword that sentence. This is the sentence that said there was no evidence of a reduction in proportion of children with small lungs or asthma symptoms. What do you think, or how do you interpret that request to reword the sentence? What do you think that they wanted them to say?
I fully expect my deputy mayors and staff to speak to experts on a whole host of areas.
Everybody does. It's not about speaking to experts. Let's be specific on this. It's about asking them to reword the findings.
Well, you speak to experts by email, by phone, or face-to-face, right?
You can speak to them many ways. You can send a pigeon. It's about asking them to reword the findings.
Well, I encourage my staff to speak to experts all the time, whether they do it face-to-face, on the phone, by email, by WhatsApp, whatever form they decide to use. And it's not uncommon for experts to disagree. That's what you'd expect.
Is Shirley an expert?
I think the expert you're talking about may disagree with other experts who've done other pieces of work. And yes, Shirley Rodriguez is an expert. And I'd expect, deputy mayors to speak to experts, and I'd expect experts to disagree with each other. That's what you have, when you've got different experts giving different points of view.
You are happy, Shirley's, she's not a scientific expert in the way that the academic from Imperial is. The fact that Shirley has asked for that sentence to be reworded, the sentence which says there was no evidence of a reduction in the proportion of children with small lungs or asthma symptoms. Shirley says, can you review it as it reads like the low emission zone has no impact at all?
Yeah.
So she's specifically asking it to be reworded because actually it flies in the face of policy.
So literally 20 minutes ago, a member of the Assembly, Leonie Cooper, was criticised for cherry-picking, a quote, paraphrase, and the email chain that's been read out now is taken out of context. I've read the entire email chain, and I think there's nothing wrong in Shelley Rodriguez talking to experts in the way she did.
So what you are maintaining is that, and I'm not reading it out of context, I'm quoting directly from the email, Shirley has reviewed and asked if there is any chance you can reword the following sentence as it reads like the low emission zone has no impact at all. You're happy with that, and you're happy with what seems to be here is a principle of asking academics to change their research or their findings because it doesn't agree with policy.
Well, if you want to read out all the emails, I'd be more than happy to do so. You're cherry-picking 2 lines from about 10 emails. I think
the line is very clear, and it's about transparency, right? It's not about even ULEZ really at this point. It's about the fact that the office and you've just taken responsibility, and you've said that the buck stops with you. You've said that any decision is the decision of the administration, so it's your responsibility. The implication here, what we've perhaps found, is that there is evidence of leaning on bodies of expert, and it could be around transport, could be around policing, could be around housing infrastructure, where your deputy mayors are asking for reports, findings to be changed so that what is printed, what is reported in the media, is more beneficial to your policy. That can't be right. It's about power, and it's about how power is being used. And that's what the concern is.
Well, Chair, let me respond to the point being made. So the assertion is members of this administration never challenge experts. I challenged the former commissioner about what happened at Clapham Common. I challenged her and the police force what happened at Clapham Common. What we discovered today, had the police force listened to me back then, thousands of damages would have been paid to the 2 women affected and legal fees. So I encourage my staff to challenge experts, and experts will disagree with each other.
And you know it's a deflection because it's not about challenge. This isn't challenge. This isn't looking at how the data was produced. This isn't testing hypothesis. Scientific method involves challenge. If you talk to anybody that is trained in science, they will say that you need to keep challenging. You need to keep asking questions. This doesn't ask a question. This doesn't challenge. It says, please reword it. That's entirely different. And things are thrown around in this chamber. And they're reported in the media, and it's important that we're honest. There's a couple of things I've picked up on today. Earlier, when you were talking to my colleague Susan Hall about the impact on black and minority ethnic people as a result of ULEZ, like I said earlier, I read stuff. This is from the Jacobs report. Talking about the ULEZ, it says it's likely to have a disproportionately high impact on black, Asian and minority ethnic people and women serving in outer London as a result of the additional cost. So your own impact assessment says that it's going to have a negative effect on black and minority ethnic people. We were talking about the reports, or the potential report, and I was pleased to hear that you are going to publish the monthly report looking at the impact of the expanded ULEZ. Can you just reconfirm that for me? You're going to publish the first month's finding, right?
That question was 2.5 minutes. I hope I get
it wasn't. It was nowhere near 2.5 minutes. That's a throwaway.
I've had the clock here. Chair, I've got the clock here. So let me be given equal time to respond to the question. I've got the clock here, 2.5 minutes. It started at 32:30, it's now 30.08. So the three points being raised is one in relation to experts. There are lots of experts in relation to the effectiveness of ULEZ. The member's referring to the effectiveness of the low emission zone, which was a Boris Johnson policy from 2008. The second issue he raised was in relation to the Jacobs report and what I said earlier on in answer to a question from Susan Hall. I'm quite clear in relation to the disproportionate impact of the ULEZ on black, Asian, minority ethnic people. What the Jacobs report says is the scheme could have a disproportionate impact, which is why we brought in the scrappage scheme. Reading the equality impact assessment, and the scrappage scheme originally was targeted towards low-income families because a vast proportion of those Londoners who are black, Asian, minority ethnic are low-income families. And the third point raised by the member was in relation to, again, an assertion that's untrue. I said I'd publish every month a report. That's not what I said.
No, I didn't. I asked you, are you going to publish the report? That was the question. Are you going to publish the 1-month report?
What I said, Chair, is we will follow the practice we followed in previous ultra-low emission zone schemes in central London, in London and now outer London, and my understanding was the practice in those schemes was we publish a report looking at the first month, we publish a report in draft form looking at the first 6 months, and we publish a report in draft form looking after the first.
So why didn't you just answer the question? So what you just said there is you're going to follow what you did last time. What you did last time was you published a report. You published it on the 10th of December. It's in front of me now. I read things. What I'm asking is, are you going to publish the month report for the expansion? And if you are going to, can we expect it in the same sort of time frame? So what, early October?
So, Chair, as I've said, TF will repeat the practice in previous ULEZ schemes, whether it's central, inner or outer, and that practice is 1 month, 6 month and a year. So
you will publish the report after a month. When can we expect it? So that, because, you know, you can be a little bit slippy. You're very good at this. So you've got the 1 month report. That will be produced by TfL. When will it be published? When will we see it?
Well, the member says he reads a lot. I wish he heard a lot as well. What I said is that TfL will follow the normal practice and publish a report 1, 6 and 12 months. Clearly it depends.
But when will they publish it? Because you can say they'll publish it 6 months after the first month. When will they publish it?
Clearly depends on the data they receive. Speaking in general terms, if there was very little data, they could be analysed pretty quickly and published pretty quickly. If there's a lot of data, in quantitative terms, that may take longer to publish. I've not been given a timeline when they're going to publish. What I have been assured by TfL is they'll follow the same practice, which is a report soon after month 1, month 6 and month 12.
Okay, so if they're going to follow the last practice, or the practice they did last time, it was published 2 weeks after the first month of implementation, so that's what we can expect. Right,
that's not what I said.
Thank you.
That's not what I said.
You said they're going to follow the practice they did last time. That's exactly what you said. Yeah. And then I'm telling you what they did last time, and you're saying you didn't say that. It's extraordinary.
Chair, it's like being back at sixth form. There are better debaters there.
Did you talk to handsome and intelligent men at sixth form as well?
I mean, honestly, Chair, for someone who reads a lot, he ain't half thick, isn't he?
Listen, no. Listen.
I would.
That's when I know you're in trouble. When you start getting personal, that's when I know you're in trouble. So remember that you're the Mayor of London and you're a grown man. Well, nearly. You're a grown man, and you should act accordingly.
I remind the members that I don't like it when we use personal abuse.
This is a Trump copy here in the Assembly and stuff. That's all. Please. Everyone wants to be Trump as a Conservative in this country.
Mr. Mayor, I just remind everyone we should not be using personal abuse in this chamber. It's not helpful and it makes us look a bit seedy, to be honest.
Chair, I think you made me think about the previous Mayor.
Assembly Member Garrett. Assembly Member Garrett was first. Assembly Member Garrett had the first intervention. Assembly Member Garrett, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, let's see if we can continue in an uplifting tone. So we're talking about taking responsibility, and you're certainly responsible for spreading the claim that air pollution causes the statistical equivalent of 4,000 premature deaths in London. What I haven't heard you say very often is what impact your Outer London ULEZ expansion will have on that 4,000 figure. So do you know what it is?
So when it comes to the impact of public health measures, it tends to help those who, the word is morbidities, those who have vulnerabilities to the condition. So, for example, to use a comparator, when it came to banning smoking in enclosed public places, it didn't lead to everybody's life expectancy.
I hesitate to interrupt after only a few seconds, but my question was not about banning smoking. It was about what impact will Outer London ULEZ have on 4,000 death figure, which you endlessly quote. Do you know the answer to that question, not a different question?
Chair, if I could answer the question how I want to answer it, rather than being prescribed.
Well, I'm just giving you a tip, because if you start answering a totally different question, talking about a policy from 20 years ago, people might think that you're avoiding...
Assembly Member Garrett, the Mayor can answer it in any way he wants and be judged on that answer.
But tips gratefully received.
Freely offered. Free of.
So we know from public health policies, whether it's banning the smoking in enclosed public places, or whether it's ULEZ in central London and inner London and indeed outer London, that it's not the impact it has on everyone, it's the impact it has on those with underlying vulnerabilities, what's called morbidity. So what I can't give is a figure in relation to on the average premature deaths a year at this stage. What I can give is the impact it'll have on those, for example, who have stunted lungs, those who have asthma attacks and so forth. What we know from central London is when we expanded the ULEZ in central London, it led to a third fewer children with asthma being admitted to hospital. And we also know in absolute terms both the reductions of NOx, nitrogen dioxide, PM2.5, in central inner London, and the predictions in outer London, which for cars is a reduction by around 10% in NOx, and in particulate matter about 16%.
So you're quoting this figure of 4,000 deaths. It's not 4,000 deaths, of course. It's a statistical construct of certain number of time lost off an average life multiplied by the number of people. Correct. So we understand that. But you quote this 4,000 deaths figure, and you cite Outer London ULEZ expansion as the answer, but you don't know what impact Outer London expansion will have on the 4,000 statistical equivalent deaths figure that you quote.
No, so what we do know is, as you mentioned, it's a calculation based upon the longevity of each life with the morbidity, is they'll live a longer life than they otherwise would. We also know from what happened in central London, those who've got asthma and serious respiratory issues, the consequences are less bad when the air is cleaner. What I don't accept is that the reason why we've done ULEZ is for everybody's life, the 10 million Londoners, to be made longer, is to particularly prevent people getting stunted lungs, to support those that do, to support people with respiratory issues and so forth. Just like, by the way, and you criticise me for doing so, previous public health policies have done, whether it's banning smoking in public places or other policies.
I'm a bit surprised that you tell me that you don't know, because I'm looking here at a report that was published as part of the ULEZ consultation last year. There's actually an appendix to a report. I'm afraid I have the same bad habit as my colleague, Assemblymember Fortune, for reading things. And this appendix, which was published more than a year ago, last March, does have the answer. So I'm just curious why you don't know when TfL published the data for all to know. And the Channel 4 fact check found it just as well as I did the same calculation as I did. So how come they know but you don't know? And that's the figure that you endlessly quote, this 4,000 deaths figure. Your TfL have published the answer to the question of how much that would reduce. So I'm quite curious that you don't know the answer.
Because it depends.
Or that you pretend actually that the answer isn't known, but it is known, or at least estimated in the same methodology.
Well, no. There's the long-term health benefits. What you're referring to in relation to the fact finder is after 1 year. And again, the reason why smoking in enclosed public places is relevant is nobody expected, 1 year after the ban was brought in, there to be, much longer lives. It takes some time for these benefits to filter through. So if you look, for example, at the work done by
So actually you are familiar with the figure, it sounds like. Having a moment ago said it wasn't known.
Chair, I've got to be able to answer the question how I want to answer it rather than being endlessly interrupted, otherwise it doesn't really work, does it? So if you look, for example, at the work done by the Environmental Research Group, previously of King's College, who were commissioned by the government, and then at Imperial College, commissioned by City Hall, what they did was look at the date an announcement is made of a policy, and then a year or so after a policy is implemented, to look at the benefits of that policy. So it's not possible to say, in 1 year's time, that the policy's been, a few months' time, the policy's been effective or ineffective. It takes some time to see how effective a policy is, but we're not looking at...
This is not... We are not talking about post hoc measurement of what happened. I'm talking about the forecast of what is expected to happen, which is the information that you had available to you when you made the decision to proceed. So the information you had available to you when you decided to proceed, which is, this report along with a bunch of other stuff, told you that the change would be something in the region of 13 minutes or 0.3% change over 1 year. Yeah. And so what I'm thinking is, so somebody who earns, say, the London living wage of about 12 quid an hour, they would have to pay, they would have to work an entire hour extra per day, and your policy to pay for your policy, which would only give them back 13 minutes over the whole year.
If I may. So somebody who's earning the London living wage, who has asthma, who has a child who's got respiratory conditions, they will see the benefits in relation to cleaner air. In relation to somebody who's healthy and fit and no underlying issues, what's called morbidity, no health issues, they'll see some benefits, but the benefits will be seen more by people with health issues. Sure. The sort of health issues are...
Hold on, you're now just repeating the thing you said earlier. The point is, you take responsibility for this policy. Do you think it's been communicated well to Londoners, by you, by your team, for whom you take responsibility, that the expected impact is in the region, from your own reports, not even on the Channel 4 fact check, I did my own maths, came to the same answer, is about 13 minutes on average? Do you think Londoners understand that from the communication that you've done around this policy?
Yeah, but if I may. But the reason for the expansion of the ULEZ is not for the 13 minutes additional life by 2023. The reason for the expansion in ULEZ is because we've not seen the benefits of cleaner air in outer London that we've seen in central and inner London.
And we've seen already cleaner than
Chair,
inner London.
come on, it doesn't work this way if there's questions that are twice the length of the answers.
Do allow the Mayor to answer.
He's not answering. There's no point allowing him to answer if he doesn't answer.
And now that's commentary.
Please allow the Mayor to answer.
I mean, that's what Twitter's for. Let me answer the question. And so the benefits in central London and inner London over a long period of time were disproportionately felt by those with respiratory issues, asthma and so forth. And similarly, we're expecting to see in outer London, and we'll have the 12-month report soon after 12 months, the benefits in outer London.
Okay.
I've never claimed, by the way, as has been alleged, that the benefits of the ULEZ expansion are 13 minutes extra life of everyone in outer London. That's never been my claim.
Okay, I think the Mayor needs to perhaps go and read some of his own documents and not misquote and mislead Londoners. I will leave that there. Thank you, Chair.
Again, Chair, commentary, not a question.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, I'd like to bring us back to the original question, which was about taking responsibility. And I just wondered if you might agree with me that all politicians, whether they be mayors or assembly members, should take responsibility for making sure that they don't mislead Londoners. And quoting randomly from emails from 2018 that were actually about the low emission zone and implying that they are about the central London, inner London or greater London ultra low emission zone is misleading, and that people should reflect on that and not mislead Londoners?
It's basic noddy debating skills you learn at sixth form, which is to give the impression of gravitas by saying, well, I've read this, or you wave a piece of paper about. George Carlin, QC, famously made a career of waving papers about, I've just got a piece of discovery. Great theatre, but we're talking about running London here. The reality is the LEZ... and it's rude just heckling during a question being answered. The low emission zone brought in by Boris Johnson is what the questioner was talking about. So what it was is a piece of work which said that actually the low emission zone didn't have the impacts we'd hoped. Well, that's a reason to bring in the ultra-low emission zone, because Johnson's policy wasn't working. But obviously, the answers doesn't fit with the narrative this lot are trying to present, which is that Boris Johnson's low emission zone, didn't achieve the benefits that the ultra-low emission zone has already achieved and will continue to achieve.
Well, it would be nice to see people occasionally quoting from the improvements that we've seen around, for example, air around schools, but I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Moema, and it concerns temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this very important question. I'm very concerned about the worsening crisis in temporary accommodation and the truly shocking fact that 1 in 50 Londoners is now homeless. 1 in 23 children in London are living in temporary accommodation. It is simply astonishing that at least one child in every classroom in London will be homeless. As well as the devastating impacts this has on individual households, I'm also acutely aware of the financial pressure this places on local authorities who have the legal duty to prevent and relieve homelessness. I'm working closely with London councils as they respond to this unprecedented crisis, and I'm grateful for the support of other organisations such as the G15. London suffers from a long-term lack of social housing, and rather than properly fund London so this can be addressed, the government has relied on the expensive and insecure private rented sector. But the supply of homes available to rent in London has decreased sharply. Last August, it was calculated that for each room available to rent, there were 7 people searching. Meanwhile, the government has frozen local housing allowance, making it impossible for people claiming benefits to afford housing in London, pushing many into homelessness. The most common reason for homelessness in England is the ending of an assured short-hold tenancy. The government must avoid further delay and urgently pass the Renters Reform Bill to protect tenants from no-fault evictions. Increasing supply is vital to alleviating these pressures in the long term. I've consistently met and exceeded my targets for new affordable housing, smashing the government target of 116,000 starts by March 2023 and building more council housing last year than at any time since the 1970s. But there's a massive shortfall between the funding the government is giving London to build and the average of £4.9 billion per year City Hall analysis shows it would take to meet London's housing need. Instead of relying on private rented housing, the government needs to trust our track record of delivery and support us to build enough social rent housing for every Londoner who needs it.
Thank you, Mayor Khan. Before I ask you my follow-up question, I want to actually ask you to pass on mine and constituents' thanks to Deputy Mayor Seb Dance. The last meeting I had before I left for leave was with him to discuss Len Maloney, and we've had some really fruitful conversations with him and TfL about that. So I think we should also commend deputy mayors when they look at something which is not quite going right and fix it. But my substantive follow-up really is to, on the point about temporary accommodation, as I'm sure you're aware, the Housing Committee's next session will be to look at temporary accommodation, and it's something that affects not just my constituency but the whole of London really appallingly, with 57% of temporary accommodation households in the capital. And we know what the cost of living crisis is doing, but I just want to know how you're working with London boroughs to help households in temporary accommodation find permanent housing.
It's a problem. I can't pretend otherwise. We are working to innovate ways that London councils, the G15, can provide more supply of housing, but it's difficult, not just because of the macroeconomic reasons that I've outlined, but there needs a massive injection of subsidy from central government. Temporary accommodation is very rarely temporary in London. What some councils are having to do is resort to use B&B for much longer than was intended. It's supposed to be for 6 weeks. Very rarely is less than 6 weeks. And a lot of councils are now having to house Londoners outside London. And so it's causing huge challenges to families uprooted from their communities. Getting to school is a nightmare, and so forth. But there is a finite supply of housing in London. The demand's huge, and particularly when you throw into the equation the London housing allowance limitations, it's a big challenge. I can't pretend otherwise.
Absolutely, and I just to echo that, Shelter's independent research shows that 80% of households in TA have been there for more than a year. So for children and their life chances, that is just incalculable, the damage that does over the longer term. But I wanted to ask you your views on reports about councils struggling to find temporary accommodation, placements in the capital, because obviously we want to make sure that all Londoners can stay here and thrive. I just wondered what your views are on how that's going and what more potentially could City Hall be doing to support those local authorities.
So if you and I were speaking 15 years ago, we'd be talking about families concerned because they're moved from one part of a ward to another, or one ward to another within a borough, or one constituency to another within a borough. That's not longer the conversation. The conversation now is being rehoused in another part of the city, and sometimes outside of the city. It's really difficult. And so that's why we're doing what we can to massively increase supply of genuinely affordable housing, new council and so forth, breaking all the records, meeting all the targets. But, experts have said that we convened, Savills and so forth, that we need about 4.9 billion pounds of investment a year. That's 6 times more than we're receiving, and so we really need the government to step up. And the good thing about this housing is it means that rather than paying for housing benefit in the private rental sector, you're creating jobs by building homes, cheaper rents, long-term security of tenure, better outcomes for those working, those in schools and so forth. So it's an investment, and so we are trying to persuade the government to move. Let's wait and see what they do.
Okay, and then my final question is, obviously you have talked about the ongoing conversations and positive relationship thus far with DLUC and the current Secretary of State. But local housing allowance is a massive factor. But beyond that, what more do you think the government could do to help?
Well, I mean, the immediate things they can do to help is unfreeze the local housing allowance, incredibly important, lift the benefit cap, really important, but also this renters reform bill that's been talked about for a long time, we were lobbying for over the last few years. It seems to have just slowed down in Parliament. We need to make sure that's passed. The Queen's speech is around the corner. If it doesn't pass by the Queen's speech, the bill is lost. It took us years to get here, so those are the 3 immediate things that spring to mind.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Best, and it concerns the paper mile in London.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you here in person as well. Thank you. I want to be crystal clear. A paper mile scheme is not on the table and not on my agenda. I won't move the goalposts on ULEZ emission standards. Londoners can be confident when they buy ULEZ compliant vehicles that will remain the case. The decision to expand the ULEZ London-wide was a difficult one, but necessary one, to save lives, protect children's lungs, and reduce the risk of developing asthma, dementia, and other health issues. Evidence shows that clean air zones like the ULEZ are a game changer when it comes to cutting toxic air to protect people's health. It's thanks in large part to the ULEZ that London's air is set to be within legal limits in the next couple of years, rather than taking 193 years without our policies as projected by King's College London. It's no secret that the government, TfL and transport officials around the country have been looking at the paper mile concept for some time. When Boris Johnson was the Mayor of London, his transport strategy referenced a paper mile scheme. TfL has been looking at new road charging options for the best part of 2 decades, and it's completely normal for officers to plan for different scenarios, including future mayoralties and government policies. Indeed, when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he asked his Treasury officials to look into a national road pricing scheme, not least because the government's worried about the lower fuel duty revenues as they pursue a policy of no new petrol or diesel cars by 2030. I remain committed to making London net zero by 2030. London is already leading the way in so many areas, from electrifying our bus and taxi fleets to having the most public rapid charging points of any European city. I've also invested in new transport links like the Superloop and 1 million additional bus kilometres in outer London, and we've opened the Elizabeth line. To build on this progress, I hope to achieve my green objective through a range of methods, including delivering the largest clean air zone in the world, increasing the quality and availability of public transport, transitioning to zero-emission buses and taxis, and supporting people to walk and cycle more with better infrastructure. I've been clear that to achieve net zero by 2030, the government needs to step up, as I only have powers to address less than half of London's emissions. That's why I'm urgently calling on ministers to provide more funding and powers to City Hall to support our efforts to bolster our green economy and build a better, more prosperous London for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fear trying to get to the core of what you think on and what you plan on this issue is going to be a little bit like trying to find out what the Lib Dems really think about ULEZ expansion, but we'll go for it anyway. In March 2022, the TfL board papers say the Mayor has asked TfL to develop proposals for consolidating existing road user charging schemes into one simple and fair pay-per-mile scheme for introduction by the end of the decade. Is that a fair reflection of what you asked TfL to do?
So, firstly, can I just, before I answer your question, can I just apologise unreservedly to Peter Fortune for calling him thick? I'm very sorry for saying that. I've reflected on that, and I shouldn't have said that. It's not appropriate for me to have said that, and I'm very sorry, genuinely. No, can I disentangle 2 things? One is the paper mile scheme, and one is road user charging. So road user charging, congestion charge, LEZ, ULEZ, having tolls on Silvertown and Blackwall Tunnel. But we have been looking at paper mile, as indeed the previous mayor did, as indeed the government is, as indeed the transport authorities around the country. And it's for the reasons I've said ostensibly in relation to, look, fuel duty is going to dry up very soon. Fuel sales is going to dry up, road tax and so forth because of government policies. So all these people, TfL, transport officials, the government, are looking at other ways to raise revenues. But I'm quite clear, some of my best, in relation to the policies I've got. ULEZ expansion to all of London, electrifying our buses and so forth. But we're not going there. It's not on the table. It's not on the radar. But TfL will often do stuff that's rejected by the current mayor and future mayors.
Just to reread that quote for you, it's the Mayor has asked TfL to look at it. So it's not TfL going off and thinking this is a great idea. It's the Mayor has asked TfL to develop proposals for paper mile scheme. Sure. And I understand what you're saying now about that not being on your agenda. Do you mean that's not on your agenda for the next year, the next 2 years? Because here it says by the end of the decade. So I understand, because things change quickly. I mean, we know it was only in 2020 or 21 that you told Assembly Member Prince that there wasn't going to be a ULEZ expansion, and then a year later there was. So we do know these things move quickly. So what does that mean? I often
ask TfL to do stuff that I reject. So I asked TfL to look into a boundary charge, which I rejected. I've asked TfL to look into a carbon charge for every time somebody drives a car, which I've rejected. TfL have been looking for some time in driverless cars, which is not coming to a road near you anytime soon. The TfL business plan for the first 4 years I was mayor said a fare increase by RPI plus 1, but I froze fares. So as long as I'm mayor, we're not going to have paper mile. What's important is to reassure Londoners, because they need the reassurance, because we've got the biggest clean air zone now in the world, that those goalposts aren't going to be moved.
Okay, because then, so that's March 2022. Then we move forward to November 2022, and you're giving a media briefing, and you say that you're looking at the Singapore scheme, a scheme that can treat each driver differently in relation to time you're driving and distance you're driving. That sounds very much like pay per mile to me, doesn't it to you? So we're talking about November now. So in November, you were still looking at pay per mile.
So let's just be quite clear. So pay per mile is not on the table, not on the radar. What I'm not saying we won't do is simplify the congestion charge, the ULEZ and the LEZ and the tolls and Silverdown Tunnel. So if there's a way of simplifying that, so rather than paying potentially 4 charges, you can do it one way. That's something I'm not averse to. It's also worth reminding colleagues that one of the things that we are looking into in TfL is whether we can insource some of the stuff that's currently outsourced as well. So that's where some of the work TfL are doing is currently looking into as well.
But do you understand how when you use the phrase you want a scheme which charges based on the distance you're driving, that sounds very much like pay per mile?
So I can't be clearer than saying...
Well, you've been quite clear in the statement saying that you're looking at a scheme that will charge people based on the distance you're driving. I think you've been very clear, which is why I'm really surprised that you're now rolling back on that, and which is why I'm finding that you are doing a bit of a Lib Dem here. I mean, I will say one of the things about you, I've always thought you stuck to your principles, and, you know, ULEZ, as you've said, has been a difficult decision, and you've stuck by and you've kept going. This, you've also been quite clear about what you wanted to do, and now we're suddenly rolling back, and it seems to me, pretending that you think that saying that you want a scheme which charges on distance you're driving couldn't be interpreted as you're looking at a pay per mile scheme.
Well, simplifying the various charges we have, TfL looking into under my mayoralty. What I will not be doing as long as I'm mayor is having the pay per mile scheme that you're referring to, I think.
So you won't be looking to charge people a penny more for driving than they're paying today?
I won't be doing that. That's not to say TfL won't be doing the work, as in the government and other transport authorities, because obviously they've got to prepare for it.
So you won't be looking to charge people any more than they're paying today to drive on London's roads?
No. Road user charging is always kept under review. Congestion charge, ULEZ, LEZ, so it's not inconceivable in the future at some date the C charge could go up or down, ULEZ could go up or down, LEZ could go up or down, as it did in the past. That's a very different question and proposition to a pay per mile scheme. A pay per mile scheme is off the table, not on my radar.
So again, I ask you, are you saying that in the near future there won't be any additional charges for road users?
So in the near future, whilst I'm here, there'll be no pay per mile scheme. The road user charging scheme is always kept under review, because the road user charging scheme includes the various things I've said. I don't repeat it. But
so you're not looking at a Singapore-style scheme anymore?
No, TfL.
You are the chair of TfL. Don't other them. They're you.
No.
You are TfL. You're the chair of TfL. You've asked them to do this work. Don't just say TfL.
Hold on a sec, Chair. Look, TfL also looking into driverless trains on the PIC line, right? Because the government told them to do so. So TfL often do pieces of work that the mayor, me, is not going to pursue, but they've got to do it because they've got a forward
You've
plan.
asked them to pursue this work. You've asked them to pursue this work. You've been the one that's quoted as saying that you want them to look into a Singapore scheme. So now I'm saying, so now are you being very clear that now, since November 2022, you are now not looking at a Singapore road user charging scheme?
So let me be clear. TfL will look into
that would be a nice change.
My apology still stands, Chair. Look, the point is this. TfL will look at lots and lots of things. I will not do lots and lots of things. I will do what I want to do. TfL advise, I decide.
Yeah, okay, thanks. It's there in black and white. You're asking them to do it. Thank you, anyway.
Thank you. I think we've had a lot of time on very few questions. I think it might be time for a break now for 10 minutes. So from 10 minutes from now, let me hit the Before we recommence the meeting, I'd just like to welcome to the public gallery students from the Ashcroft Technology Academy in Putney. Yay. You're there? Very good. Nice uniforms. I would say perfect colour, but I have to be impartial. We'll now move on to the next question, which is in the name of Assembly Member McCartney, and it concerns the homelessness crisis.
Chair, can I echo your welcome to students from the Ashcroft Technology Academy. I've had the pleasure of meeting them with their fantastic member of the Assembly, Leonie Cooper, so nice to see you all in the gallery. I share Crisis and London Council's concerns about the rise in homelessness and strongly agree that the government must take urgent action to prevent more Londoners becoming homeless. In July, my Deputy Mayor Tom Copley wrote to Michael Gove to call for emergency intervention alongside my London Housing Panel, senior officers from every London borough and voluntary organisations working across London. At my request, Tom also recently reconvened the Housing Delivery Task Force, at which members highlighted the scale of the challenge faced in London and the pressing importance of new affordable homes to resolve the crisis. In addition, my housing team is working closely with London councils as London tries to develop solutions to this crisis and to jointly call on the government to intervene. Londoners are facing a triple whammy of soaring rents, a challenging private rental market and the ongoing cost of living crisis. Research by London School of Economics and Savills found that the proportion of new homes listed at London housing allowance rates has fallen to 2% in London, even lower than the 5% elsewhere in the country. I've repeatedly called on the government to invest the £4.9 million a year required to deliver affordable housing on the scale that is needed, building on my success in delivering record levels of affordable housing for Londoners. This will take time, however, and the government must act now to prevent a worsening homelessness crisis. I've been calling on the government to provide immediate relief to London's renters by raising LHA rates to median market rents and scrapping the benefit cap. LHA rates frozen at 2020 levels are forcing Londoners of 2023 into poverty and homelessness. But the government must go further to make sure private renting is more affordable if we're to prevent further homelessness. The government must give me the power to introduce an emergency 2-year rent freeze in London and set up a commission to look at rent controls. I'm also calling on the government to devolve a range of powers to councils to crack down on long-term empty homes, including the power to charge uncapped council tax.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And my colleague, Assembly Member Mwema, has raised the issue of temporary accommodation. London councils estimate they're spending about £60 million per month just on temporary accommodation. And at the last Mayor's question, I raised the issue of the government refusing to raise the local housing allowance, and you stated that you were lobbying them, you'd asked for a meeting. Have you had any response from government yet?
Unfortunately, nothing positive to report back on. There is another opportunity, though, with the autumn statement. And so when it comes to our autumn statement submission to the government, we'll look to see what additional things should go in. And clearly, the unfreezing the LHA is one of the things we need to consider, because the problem is the gap between the LHA and what people are expected to pay is widening, and so we need to address that.
Thank you, and I do hope you do put that as one of your key asks of government. The other real impact on Londoners at the moment is those that are looking to have a home are finding mortgage payments increasingly difficult. Repossessions are rising, especially in London. And are you concerned that Londoners, particularly there's a group that use the government's help to buy mortgages to get on the housing ladder, are now at risk of losing their homes because of the sudden rise in the cost of their repayments? I think you estimated there could be about 4,500 Londoners affected, with some of them having mortgage payment increases of up to £900 a month.
Well, firstly, we've got to make clear the reasons why interest rates have gone up and mortgages have gone up. That is the catastrophic mini budget from Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. Some in this room, by the way, tweeted support of that budget. At last, a Conservative budget. It is alleged they have said, no doubt, take that out of context. They'll have a chance to explain themselves shortly about what they meant. As a consequence of Liz Truss's mini budget, interest rates have gone up and people are struggling. The IFS calculate the average budget has gone up by £520 a month. But here's the problem. Those who bought a property with the Help to Buy scheme got a fixed-term mortgage, which comes to an end now. And guess what? A consequence of Liz Truss's mini budget is their repayments now are far higher than they can afford because they've got income of a certain level, and now the expenditure because of the mortgage has gone up hugely. So what I said to the government is, look, through no fault of their own, these people are going to really struggle. They may have their houses repossessed and so forth, and the government should step in and support those people affected in London. It's a big source of concern. I lived through a recession in previous decades where people's homes were repossessed. These people's dreams of owning a home has come to fruition. It'd be heartbreaking if 2 years on, through no fault of their own, they had to give up those homes or those homes are repossessed.
That's right, and in fact, they're due to go up annually by CPI plus 2%, which, given the rate of inflation, is going to be really crippling for many families. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Lord Bailey, Building Homes for Londoners.
Chair, can I just say, Sean, you were absent at the last meeting because of your family bereavement, but I did pass on my personal congratulations to your appointment to the House of Lords. So congratulations. I know your family must be really proud of you. So good luck, and apologies that I couldn't say that last time because you weren't here, but congratulations.
Genuinely, thank you for that. Genuinely, thank you.
Chair, since I've been Mayor, City Hall has consistently broken records and hit ambitious targets to build genuinely affordable homes in the capital. Despite the challenges of inflation and high borrowing costs, we exceeded the ambitious target the government set in to start 116,000 affordable homes by March 2023. Last year alone, we funded over 25,000 new affordable home starts across the capital. During my mayoralty, on average, more than 36,000 homes per year across all tenures have been completed in London, around 10,000 per year more than my predecessor, and more in net terms than any time since the 1930s. In March, I surpassed my council house building target by supporting London boroughs to start over 23,000 new council homes since 2018, the highest rate since the 1970s. Over the past few years, London's housing sector has stepped up to the plate by continuing to build homes in the face of extremely challenging conditions, including high material cost inflation and borrowing costs stemming from the pandemic and last year's disastrous government budget, as well as the impacts of Brexit and the war in Ukraine. However, overall house building in London is still well below the annual need of our city. This is not a problem unique to London. The same pattern can be seen across the country, where not enough homes are being built to meet need. The main reason for this is a lack of funding from the government. City Hall research published in December 2020 shows that to deliver the number of affordable homes Londoners need, we need £4.5 billion from government annually, 6 times the amount we're currently receiving. We also need funding for infrastructure that will unlock more sites, such as the Bakerloo Line extension and further extensions to the Docklands Light Railway and London Overground. I'm pleased in this context that the Secretary of State agreed to renegotiate the terms of our 21-26 AHP to ensure we can safeguard delivery. It took some time for the government to approve this reprofiling, meaning partners only now have the certainty to begin working on these schemes. London's needs for affordable housing is exacerbated by the challenging economic conditions, which is why I recently wrote to the Secretary of State calling for a further £2.2 billion to get affordable homes building back on track to the levels we agreed in 2020. We've shown in London that with the right funding, we can hit our housing targets and deliver for Londoners. The government now needs to back us to do just that.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your answer. And just before I ask my follow-up question, can I just ask you something? As earlier on, Assemblymember Ahmed and both yourself suggested that young children in school who are receiving free school meals are being asked to queue separately. Is that a practice that is still going on?
Chair, the good news in secondary schools is no. So in secondary schools, I know it's not the question, but yeah, I think it's relevant if the Chair gives me permission. Yes, so in secondary schools, because of some schools have fingerprinting, some have cards, you wouldn't know who's receiving means-tested free school meals and who's not. And we had a discussion at previous MQTs, I think, some of them are best about secondary schools and how you can support those families. In primary schools, I certainly remember both secondary and primary school that happening. The good news is it's irrelevant from last week because everyone in primary schools is now receiving free school meals.
Okay, I was going to say if it is still relevant, let's have a look at that because that's a terrible thing. All right. You're currently sitting on £4 billion of government funding to start and complete your 21-26 affordable homes programme. You haven't built a single home thus far in the last 2 years. Why is that, and when do you intend to start?
So that's not quite right. We started 25,000 homes last year. I think what the moment refers to is in that new programme.
Yes, 21-26 affordable housing programme.
So as I explained in my substantive answer, because the government is reprofiling, so what the government said was, we accept, to give them credit, and I should, we accept that things have changed since that the agreement was made, and the amount of monies we gave to London, we've got to reduce the target in relation to the homes to begin because of the reasons I've set out in my main answer. That reprofiling meant no developer wanted to start a home under the old scheme because obviously the reprofiling meant it'd be more generous to those developers. So now the government has reprofiled the scheme, we can get going, but there's now another uncertainty, which I mentioned in my opening, which is the second staircase. And so if you're a developer now and you want to build a tall building above 18 metres, you're not sure about the requirements for a second case. And as I said in my opening, we estimate 34,000 homes which are paused until the uncertainty around second staircases has been resolved. So good news about reprofiling. We still need some good news in relation to second staircase.
So in looking at this second staircasing issue, are you saying you have 34,000 units that are affected by this uncertainty that you've identified in planning, in train, and that's where that figure came from?
Potentially, and that's just things that we see. So don't forget, there are some schemes that don't come to City Hall because they're done locally because they're not tall enough or not big enough. So yeah, that's the scale of homes that could be started if there was certainty in relation to second staircase. Now, there's a but coming up, which is depending on what the government does in relation to design and technical details, some may need to be paused further because if, for example, you can use the same parameters to have two staircases, that's different from having a separate parameter for a second staircase. So it depends what the government says. The key thing is certainty. But that's the figure we're talking about, yeah.
So I'm just trying to be very clear about this 34,000. That's an estimate, or you actually have those planning permissions asked for?
No, that's the number of schemes that are currently before my desk. So the analysis shows on the major development sites being held up due to the lack of new rules, the number is 34,000 above 18 metres. Okay. There's a separate conversation about 30 metres. That's the analysis of the developments that we know are in train. Okay.
And in your own, you set your own rules around above 30 metres. How is that? Why didn't there was some confusion there because you set rules about 2 staircases above 30 metres, but yet you gave planning permission for 21 blocks that didn't have that provision in them. So has some of your own rules added to the confusion as well?
No. So the government only made this announcement in July.
Yeah.
So applications before July clearly are irrelevant. So the government says in July, I'm paraphrasing, that we're looking now at those developments above 30 metres about a need for a second staircase. So we straight away said to developers, look, the government is saying this, they're consulting on this, we're going to err on the side of caution, and any scheme from now, in other words from July, that's more than 30 metres, will need a second staircase. That gave certainty. The government subsequently, Michael Gove, said it's not 30 metres above which second staircase, it's 18 metres. And so there's now a conversation with those developers saying, hold on a sec, the government first said 30 metres, now they're saying 18 metres. We don't know what to do because we don't want to waste money on something that's in between the two. So we're saying to the government, look, we need certainty in relation to details of any transition period. Is it 18 metres or 30 metres? What are the technical requirements and guidance? Without those things, you can understand why a developer won't want to spend millions of pounds in a scheme. And so the sooner we get that, the sooner these developments can get going.
Okay, and when you talk about the thing that concerns me, sorry, just to flip back, sorry, Mayor, to talk about the 21-26 Affordable Homes Programme. In the past, you've often said that the delivery become at the end, a lot of application at the front, actual delivery is at the end, and you've now reprofiled. Are we going to get any of these homes by this 2026 deadline?
It depends if the government can give certainty sooner rather than later. If they can't, it looks like there'll be a small number of completions. So the scheme essentially is now 23 to 26. The scheme is essentially 23,000 new homes. Without the certainty, we can't get going in those new homes. And, you know, basically, roughly speaking, 2 years between permission and a new home being completed. Of the starts we had at 116,000, roughly speaking, 2/3 are completed. But you're right, unless you start, you're not going to finish. And that's why I'm frustrated, and I wrote to Michael Gove again this week to get some progress on this.
Okay. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if we can now go to Assembly Member Baker, and it concerns Streets for People.
Thank you, Chair. Our transport strategy puts people and public health at the centre of investment in the capital's streets, aiming to create a city that is well connected, has healthy residents, and is a good place to visit and live. I'm proud of our investment in streets, including an average of £150 million a year over the current TfL business plan in safe and active travel. This means more high-quality cycleways, safety improvements at junctions, lower speeds on TfL roads, priority routes for buses and schemes that unlock the regeneration and growth of communities. This includes funding for London's boroughs to deliver vital improvements locally, such as school streets, new and upgraded pedestrian crossings, and 20 miles per hour speed limits on borough roads. Through our investment, we've nearly quadrupled the size of the cycle network from 90 kilometres to over 340 kilometres as of July 2023. Further investment can also boost the economy and support retailers and businesses. You know, walking and cycling improvements can increase local retail spend by up to 30%, and improving London's high streets can lead to increases of up to 200% in people shopping, sitting and socialising. Transport for London also conducted a study that showed that over the course of a month, people who walk to the high street spend up to 40% more than those who drive. Over 500 school streets have now been introduced, meaning better air quality around schools and safer environments for everyone dropping off at school. TfL's leisure walking plan aims to activate and promote new leisure walking opportunities and improve existing infrastructure. And TfL also uses its Wildflower Verges programme to help create a more livable and nature-rich city, and is committed to delivering 5,000 square metres of SUDS catchment along its road network a year.
Thanks for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I want to follow up by asking specifically a couple of questions related to pedestrians and pavements, because I think it's really important that walking and wheeling doesn't get deprioritised, especially as it often acts as an access to public transport for longer journeys. Well, always, presumably. So several London boroughs are aiming, I've put together strategies to add more benches, street furniture, water fountains, all to make streets more attractive to be on and walk along. Is TfL seeking to do a similar thing on red routes on TfL run roads?
Yes, but can I first I agree with the premise of what you're saying. Often walking and cycling is forgotten about because we look at the big infrastructure projects and forget about the really important stuff that matters to Londoners. So yes, we are. We look at some best example in boroughs, but TfL themselves have I think it's called a healthy streets approach on that very issue to make our streets more attractive, better air quality, as I mentioned, better, the verges, somewhere to sit and so forth. It's really important. You'll recall one of the lessons we said we learned from last year's temperatures exceeding 41 degrees is more shading from trees, so forth. So we are looking into that, not just working with councils on their roads, but TfL roads, red routes as well.
Thank you. I think that'd be really positive. I do slightly want to disagree though, because I'm not sure cycling is often forgotten. I think walking might be, and that's actually my point, that we maybe need to separate those off. And very specifically, I want to ask about bus stop bypasses, because that's one of the few areas where few situations where pedestrians and cyclists may effectively come into conflict. Concerns have been raised about the conflicts between pedestrians and cyclists, and I've written to your Deputy Mayor for Transport on this, seeking some reassurances, because there is a review coming up this autumn, and I made a couple of very, very specific points, one of which is around whether it is possible to design a bus stop bypass where cyclists naturally will stop, like motorists will almost entirely naturally stop at a zebra crossing, because I am concerned that it may not be possible. And I also asked whether it was possible to pause the rollout until that review had been undertaken. And unfortunately, I didn't get an answer to those specific questions. In fact, I got an answer that, again, prioritised the expansion of cycling as an equalities impact, rather than looking at the people, in fact, who are most vulnerable in this case, which is often visually impaired people or older people. And also the response prioritises collisions data, when actually what I'm concerned is the people will just simply stop going out. Small number of people, but they simply will. So my question really is, are these concerns that are these issues that you're concerned and interested in about as well? And also, can you ask your Deputy Mayor to take a closer look at this?
Chair, why don't I just ask the Deputy Mayor and the Walking Cycle Commissioner to look at the comments that the member raised in the preamble to the question in relation to some of her concerns, which she articulated very well in the first and second part of her question, but that's the intention of the review, to do just that. I remember an exchange with Member Emma Best, her advice being not just to focus on collisions, look at the cameras, to see what's going on in relation to behaviour, because often it's not necessarily a collision, and so forth. That's your point about deterring people who otherwise would be walking from walking, particularly visually impaired. And I'd also remind them of the importance of the equality impact stuff that you allude to in relation to older people and so forth. Can I take that away? And what I'll do is I'll simply make sure the transcript of our exchange is shared with the team doing the review.
Yeah, thanks. Absolutely. Back to you, Chair.
And at that point, I'm just going to hand over the chair to Assembly Member Sir Hota.
Thank you, Chair. I think peace has broken out in the Assembly. I think the share price and street cred of some members has now gone down. This 5-year project has created a. Sorry, I'm answering your.
Yes.
This 5-year project has created a unique public maker space in Barking and Dagenham. It has promoted the circular economy, enabled nearly 10,000 local residents to work together on a range of neighbourhood initiatives, and made significant improvements to local people's lives. This warehouse is an example of meanwhile use, a space being used for a set period for a purpose that might not be viable forever, while the owner of the land plans what to do with the land in the longer term. We encourage landowners to do this, as some use of the land, even for a short term, is better than the piece of land doing nothing positive at all whilst waiting for development. In this case, the original lease was negotiated on a peppercorn rent on the basis that it would be time limited to initially 3 and later 5 years, while the council developed its wider regeneration strategy for the area. I understand the land was initially earmarked in the longer term for housing, but is now likely to be put to commercial use. These plans will, I'm sure, provide significant benefits to the local community. I would have welcomed the project securing a sustainable future and continuing at its current location, but it's not accurate to say that the project coming to an end means that the time and effort public authorities and local people put into making the project such a success for many years was wasted. Many local people have learned and developed new skills as a result of the project, and many local enterprises will have been allowed to flourish because of it. Work is now well underway to secure an effective legacy for the project. The assets purchased with GLA funding will be relocated to a range of social enterprises, charities and community facilities across the borough, based on the recommendations of an independent...
Mr Mayor, can I interrupt you very quickly, because I have limited time? Sure. Will you meet with members of the Friends of the Warehouse campaign group in order to... you've said a lot of things there which aren't quite accurate, and I'd love you to be able to meet directly with them to explain their position, bearing in mind that what's being achieved there is directly in the aims of your communities in crisis objectives.
Well, Deputy Chair, I'm very happy for the Chair request to be seated to by officers from City Hall meeting with the relevant colleagues in the borough. I would point out it's a borough scheme, not a GLA scheme.
But it's a campaign
Mr Mayor, the Conservatives are out of time now.
Campaign group.
Soon to be out of time.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Meet with the borough, waste of time. We'll just go next to Assembly Member Desai, who wishes to speak about retail crime.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the very real impacts retail crime can have on businesses, especially their hard-working staff. I've heard from the British Retail Consortium and directly from the business representatives and concerned companies about the impact that thefts, assaults and abuse are having. Only last week, my Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime attended the London Business Improvement District Summit to hear firsthand the issues affecting businesses and talk about best practice, the operational work the MPS is undertaking and the oversight MOPAC has of this work. I met with the London Business Forum last week when similar issues were discussed. The MPS Business Crime Hub works closely with the business crime reduction partnerships, business improvement districts and retailers to prevent offences from happening and provide advice on how to keep their staff and business safe. In recognition of the growing concern about retail crime, the Met Police Service is further developing its approach to tackling this offending. This work is aligned to the new Met for London plan, in which the Met Police Service have committed to working with all communities, including businesses, and responding to crime concerns accordingly. There are ongoing police operations across London that focus on investigating organised criminal networks that exploit children and vulnerable adults to shoplift for them. Through the Met Police Service commitment to the strongest ever neighbourhood policing, activity will be bolstered by town centre teams and is being undertaken in conjunction with key partners. A dedicated commander has just been appointed and he has commissioned a specific problem profile to provide greater understanding of retail crime trends, which will in turn better inform enforcement activity. MOPAC has engaged with him to support this work and monitor progress. I've long supported the need to better protect retail workers from violence, and I was pleased to see this protection included as part of the Policing, Crime Sentencing and Courts Act, which sees tougher sentences in place for those committed aggravated assault on retail workers. But whilst there's been progress in terms of legal protections, these remain limited without the resources needed to tackle offending, and it's vital that the government properly funds not just the police, but also the wider criminal justice service.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I welcome what you said, and particularly about what the Met are doing and proposing to do. But I still got to put this to you. The figures I have in front of me show that, and this is from the COP group, that their freedom of information data, that only 71% of retail crime isn't responded to at all by the Met. Perhaps this is something you might wish to sort of draw to the Met's attention and in terms of reporting, encouraging, and how they're responding in practice.
Certainly, Chair, it's a big source of concern. I'll take that away and make sure that the police are aware of that stat. You'll be aware, Senator Desai, that until the new Commissioner prioritised the issue of burglaries, people who are victims of residential burglaries weren't receiving a visit, and the town centre teams should alleviate some of this. But I'll make sure that the police are aware of the stat you referred to.
Thank you. And just one more stat. The British Retail Consortium stated that retailers estimate that just 16% of crimes against businesses are reported to the police. Again, massive underreporting. Mr. Mayor, so how is the Met responding to incidents of social media organised shoplifting, like what we saw in Oxford Street last month?
Well, can I commend the Met Police Service for their response to what they saw on social media in advance of the steaming event, inverted commas, that was in social media. The police's swift action working with retailers and the North West End Company led to a dispersal order being put in place. Arrests were made in relation to Oxford Street for those 48 hours whilst there was a Section 35 dispersal order, and that sort of behaviour is unacceptable. There are no ifs and buts, and the police will take action. And if anybody's got information about any future inverted commas steaming events, please ensure the police know about that, so action can be taken.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I quite like what you said about no ifs and buts, because those are exactly the words I used last week in this chamber, that nothing justifies assault of any type on our shop workers, who, after all, do a fantastic job in our communities. Mr. Mayor, finally, and very quickly, because I'm conscious of my time, there was positive news this morning about Wilkinson and the proposed closure of many of their stores, job losses and effect on local communities, 4 in my constituency alone. However, I would still ask you to consider doing whatever you can in your power, including writing to the government, to offer support to the rescue plans that were announced this morning.
Heard loud and clear, Chair.
And a major campaign for the GMB trade union, of course.
Great trade union.
Thank you. The next question comes from Assembly Member Pidgeon, and it concerns accessibility of London's public transport.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. Improving the accessibility of London's transport network is an important priority for me, and I'm pleased that TfL has made good progress in recent years. There are now over 200 step-free stations across TfL's network. A third of the tube network is now step-free, and that's a 33% increase since 2016, as well as over 60 stations on the London Overground. Paddington and Knightsbridge are set to become step-free next year, with Colindale and Leyton to follow. TfL has also announced the next 10 Tube stations being reviewed for potential step-free access and committed £20 million a year for improving accessibility. Signage to improve step-free wayfinding in stations has also been installed at 16 Tube, 11 Elizabeth Line and 2 DLR stations, with more to follow. All new Elizabeth Line stations are step-free, and TfL is making the case to the DfT for level boarding at Old Oak Common. The newest station on the UK's newest railway must be fully accessible for customers who require step-free access. London's bus network is one of the most accessible in the world. Every bus in London is wheelchair accessible, and 95% of bus stops are step-free. Every DLR station and tram is step-free. Every TfL pier is accessible, and the cable car is step-free. All black cabs are wheelchair accessible, and London has around 600 wheelchair accessible private hire vehicles. There is, of course, much more to accessibility than just providing step-free access. The TfL Go app now provides more information about services, for example, showing journeys with the least walk-in, the busyness of station, and the availability of facilities like toilets to accommodate different needs. I'm proud that despite huge pressures caused by government austerity and the pandemic, TfL continues to provide dial-a-ride services as well as supporting the taxi card scheme that subsidises taxi journeys for older and disabled Londoners. TfL's been working on a host of additional measures to improve accessibility, including the Please Offer Me a Seat badge, new moquettes on buses for priority seating, and improved disability equality training for all TfL staff. All this has been in the context of TfL reforming its finances, so it's on track to achieve an operating surplus in 23-24. The big remaining question is on capital funding. TfL is still awaiting for a capital deal from the government, which will allow us to continue to invest in important projects that will improve accessibility on the network.
Thank you very much for your answer. At our last Mayor's Question Time, I raised with you my concern about the future Old Oak Common station on the Elizabeth Line, which you've just mentioned, which will not have level boarding for passengers. You mentioned what TfL's doing. I'm just wondering what conversations you've had with the DfT since I raised this.
Can I thank the member for raising this last time? There has been progress with DfT and HS2 in relation to the issue you raised, MQTs, in relation to level boarding. Without wishing to count our chicks, we hope progress can be made. This is years away. Yes. There was no justification for that not happening, and so I'm happy to ask TfL to continue to keep the member informed of progress.
Okay.
We are hopeful.
Lovely, that's really good to hear. But you mentioned the Elizabeth Line. Similarly on that line, I have discovered that Hanwell Station has no tactile paving on its platform edges. You know, this is a basic health and safety issue, let alone accessibility issue. When will all Elizabeth Line stations have tactile paving on all platform edges?
Chair, can I take that away? I think, if I explain, the priority was obviously the stations that were built in central London, and then huge improvements made to the stations in east and west. She's right to phrase it as a health and safety issue. Can I take that away? Also, what I'll undertake to do is just do an audit of the other Elizabeth Line stations to make sure those sorts of issues are looked into. At the very least, there's got to be an audit. It shouldn't be a member of the Assembly letting us know if that's not known by TfL. But can I get back to you on that?
Yeah,
as well?
Well, let me come to my last question, which you may have started to answer. The Elizabeth Line is absolutely the jewel in the crown of TfL's network, and it should be an exemplar of truly accessible transport. Yet it's come to my attention earlier this month a disabled person could not board an Elizabeth Line train at Maryland Station. The ticket office was closed. There was no member of staff around to help them with a manual boarding ramp needing to board the train. But TfL has a clear commitment. All Elizabeth Line stations are staffed from first to last train. Turn up and go service offered for anyone needing assistance. So I'm asking, will you commit to a full review of all aspects of accessibility on the Elizabeth Line to ensure it genuinely is accessible to all passengers and Londoners?
Chair, as part of the audit in relation to tactile paving that's referred to by the member, I'll also ask TfL to look into the issue of staff not being there. She's right. We aspire to be turn up and go, so people don't have to, in advance, make sure there's a member of staff there. I'm not sure what happened at that particular station of Maryland, but I'm more than happy, as part of the audit, to look into that issue as well. And that's something that's been brought to your attention. There may be other examples not brought to your attention where somebody couldn't use the Elizabeth Line because a staff member wasn't present. Can I take that away as well and revert back to her?
Thank you. And I mean, just to add, as I have a few seconds left, that there's also a huge issue about the announcements on the Elizabeth line being confusing, not in terms of accessibility, but for tourists. And I've witnessed tourists not being able to work out where they should get off for the different Heathrow stops, for example. So I think there's a real piece of work to do there to make sure it is fully accessible.
Can I take that away? I'll take that away as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. The Liberal Democrat group are now out of time. The next question is from Assembly Member Harani concerning the funding of public services in London.
Thanks for the question. The sustained lack of sufficient investment in public services over the past 13 years is a political choice. It has resulted in grave social and economic consequences, including collapsing school roofs, overcrowded prisons, historically high NHS waiting lists, local government bankruptcies, and dilapidated infrastructure. ONS data shows that in 2021-2022, London's net fiscal contribution to the Exchequer was £4,300 per person, greater than any other region in the UK. Despite this, as the IFS report highlights, the government has not been meeting the funding needs of Londoners. And it's not just Londoners that the government has failed, it's also wide swathes of England. The IFS found that only 39 areas out of 150 were receiving a share of funding within 5% of their share of estimated local government spending needs, while rural areas with older populations tended to receive higher shares of funding than they were estimated to need. The National and International Capital Cities grant, NIC, which is supposed to compensate the Met Police for the additional costs that come with police in the capital, is underfunded by £159 million, according to figures produced by the government's own independent review. This underfunding, combined with significant cuts to mental health and youth services, risk allowing young people to slip into a life of crime and violence. As for the government's levelling up funding, government data shows that the second tranche of this funding benefited less deprived local authorities more than those areas with greater need, with Conservative-run councils disproportionately benefiting from the allocation. I continue to call on the government to deliver a fair funding settlement for London and all UK regions. This settlement should consider local authorities' spending needs and should seek to narrow inequalities, not widen them.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm glad in particular that you referred to the international and national capital cities grant in your opening answer. As well, and the unique nature of London and its policing. Monday marked the 22nd anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, and we are 18 years on from the 7/7 bombings. The threat of Islamist-related extremism is still present, and we are experiencing rises in far-right extremism as well. But the Met still does not receive its fair share of funding from NIC, as you referred to. And still is waiting to receive funding for policing the coronation. The 1 year on from Harris Review report said that the Home Office are refusing to pay for permanent counter-terrorism measures on London's bridges. So based on your remarks as well and underfunding, what impact is underfunding having in keeping Londoners safe?
Well, firstly, I support and record my thanks to the security services and the police for the incredible work they do day in, day out. The language used by experts in this area is not a question of if there's another attack, it's a question of when there's another attack, and their hard work ensures that when is delayed and delayed and delayed and delayed. When you speak to the experts, they talk about a whole policing operation. So if you're cutting police officers on the streets, that has an impact on terrorism as well as shoplifting. And that's why it's really important to recognise the underfunding of NIC by £160 million impacts all of London's safety, not just the threats from terrorists, but those from shoplifters, burglaries, robberies, and so forth. But we saw in the last few days the consequences of government austerity, with somebody charged with terrorist offences escaping wards of prison. And that's why it's so important for us to explain austerity is a choice. There are consequences of austerity. That's why it's incredibly important to call the government out and say, you're an expert, not my expert, not the public's expert. Your expert is saying we're shortchanged to the tune of £160 million, and we'd like that money.
Thank you. And continuing on that theme of underfunding, we are seeing the impact of underfunding across many areas of public services in this country. from crumbling school buildings, local authorities going bankrupt, and, like you said, prisoners escaping from prisons that are understaffed as well. Across the country and in London, we are now seeing the fallout from more than a decade of this government's austerity programme in public services, from a tired zombie government that, as it limps towards its last days of office. What do you say towards seeing some change in this country now, so that, as you said, and you referred to the answer before in house building, for example, as well, we need clarity from government on multiple areas of public services and states. How can we address that going forward?
Look, there's an opportunity the government's got. One of the advantages of incumbency is you can do stuff that you can't do in opposition. And the government's got an autumn statement coming up. And there's an opportunity for the Chancellor to rectify some of the massive errors of the last 13, 14 years with proper investment in public services, whether it's police, probation, the NHS, schools, house building and the like. But it's also a really good way of having an active industrial policy as well, because using taxpayers' money to stimulate the economy is a good way of there being more tax revenues going forward as well. And we've seen just in the last few weeks, not just the escape of somebody charged with terrorist offence from Wandsworth Prison, literally some schools in London not being able to open as a direct consequence of austerity over the last few years. I remember, in 2010, lobbying the government not to cut the Building Schools for Future programme. And some of these schools affected were the schools cut as a consequence of the government's Building Schools for Futures programme. We've seen today the publication confirming that these are the longest lists the NHS has ever known, those waiting for help from the NHS. So look, the government's got a chance to make amends in the autumn statement. We'll be making representations to the government, so London Council on a cross-party basis, and we're hoping the government accedes to some of these things, not as a bung to the voter in advance of a general election to try and bribe the voter, but it's the right thing to do, and it's in the national interest to do so.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Clark, and it concerns LFB response times.
Thank you. I'm immensely proud that London Fire Brigade's response times are amongst the fastest in the country. The brigade has achieved these response times even in the context of real-term funding cuts to fire and rescue services from the government. As a testament to the hard work of everyone involved at LFB that the brigade is able to keep response times low, from control operators who dynamically mobilise appliances to ensure LFB resources are used to the most efficient way, to the people driving these appliances and other firefighters too. As Mayor, I'm committed to keeping all of London's 102 fire stations open. I've worked in partnership with the London Fire Commissioner to ensure that City Hall funding for LFB's essential services is ring-fenced, so the brigade can continue to protect and serve the people of London. The value of this ring-fencing has been demonstrated by the recent figures released by the Home Office showing the LFB's response times remain very good. The LFB constantly strives for improvement using data collected from incidents to support operational learning, which includes considering how the brigade can improve response times even further. For example, the brigade uses previous incident data to identify the optimal location for appliances. Officers also use operational learning to better understand the risks in London. It's vitally important that the LFB continues to meet its attendance time targets to keep Londoners and London safe. The Community Risk Management Plan includes key performance indicators setting out response times which continue to be useful for accountability.
Thank you for that, and good afternoon, Mr. Mayor. Just on that, we're very aware of how many responsibilities the London Fire Brigade have, including funding, including flood response, and also making our built environment safe when some of those buildings are not safe. I'm just wondering what discussions you're having with the government regarding an increased level of funding to ensure that the fire service in London has the right level of funding to keep us all safe. And I'm just keeping in mind that actually your ring fencing does provide a lot of assurance to the London Fire Brigade, but what further funding is the government offering?
No, we continue to lobby the government, both the Commissioner and myself, and there's a big concern, just so you're aware, around the country in relation to local authority funding issues and the ability to fund LFB, their fire services in a way that we can in LFB and they can't. So, look, as I said previously, there's an autumn statement coming up. We want the Home Secretary and the Fire Minister to be batting for us, batting for the fire service. In answer to a previous question in relation to DLUC returning money for house building, I made the same point in relation to this. Each respective Secretary of State should be arguing for decent investment in their particular departments from the Treasury as indeed I'm hoping the Fire Minister does as well.
Great. On a slightly related topic, I want to just ask you about something related to what Assemblymember Hirani was talking about with you. But in Barnet, we just had a successful example of clear, hold, build. And I think it really shows what happens when local authorities work with the Met and, crucially, work with our residents and work with our councillors, in particular, the excellent councillor Sarah Conway, who deserves lots of credit for persevering with that. But I'm just wondering what lessons can be learned from that?
Well, can I just commend the London Borough of Barnet and the Met Police team, their councillors and yourself for the work you've done to just improve the quality of life in that estate from, clear, hold, build. The Fire Commissioner, like the Met Commissioner, understands the importance of winning people over. That trust and confidence is really important, whether it's fighting crime or fighting fires or preventing fires or preventing crime. And so you've seen the Fire Commissioner and actually indeed the Met Police Commissioner going out and about, listening, engaging and responding to the points being made. And by the way, that community you referred to who benefited from the policies in Barnet, Clear, Hold and Build, were always pro-police but lost confidence because of their experiences and are more pro-police than they were before. The same goes for the fire service. I was at an event during Notting Hill Carnival with the Fire Commissioner and firefighters in the community, in the Grenfell community. A lot of work needs to be done to win back their trust and confidence as well. And both the Fire Commissioner and the Met Commissioner are determined to do just that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to say, we've been hearing in Barnet from parents on the estate who say that for the first time they can let their children out to play, and that's the difference those sort of actions make. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Assemblymember Cooper next, concerning the era of global boiling.
Thank you for the question. July was the hottest month ever recorded on Earth. We saw places around the world on fire and people struggling to control it. Last year, London hit over 40 degrees, a record temperature only made possible by climate change. Tragically, this led to almost 400 excess summer deaths in London. Last year, schools were closed, hospital operations cancelled, as systems crashed, and wildfires caused the busiest week for the London Fire Brigade since the Second World War. Over the last week, we saw the hottest September day in London since 2016, and the longest ever September hot spell with 4 consecutive days of 30 degrees Celsius. The UN Secretary-General has been clear that the window to hold warming at 1.5 degrees is rapidly closing. It's still possible, but there's a lot to do. I'm fully committed to making London net zero by 2030, but need government support, and we must also deal with the reality of climate impacts right now. Last week, I triggered a severe weather emergency response to support rough sleepers. I've established indoor and outdoor cool spaces, provided guidance for care homes, nurseries and schools, and published advice on the installation of cool roofs. I've established water refill points across the city and installed a network of more than 100 drinking water fountains. Following last year's extreme temperatures, I pledged a further £3.1 million for tree planting to provide more cooling and shading. But much more is needed to prepare our homes, built environment, public spaces and critical infrastructure for more extreme climate events. For this reason, I've commissioned an independent climate resilience review chaired by Emma Howard-Boyd to prepare London for more extreme weather. The review will report later this year.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and I think it's very timely that you have appointed Emma Howard-Boyd to undertake this review because however much we've done so far, we know that there's so much more that needs to be done. I wondered if I could just focus in on the issue about adapting buildings to heat. You started your remarks with the issue of heat. Planting trees and Thames water and suds and all of those things is good, but are we really doing enough in terms of maybe some of them slightly more light touch things, like encouraging people to fit shutters, awnings and canopies, which can, in many countries all over Europe where they're more used to the sun, we don't really fit them so much, apart from maybe outside shops. What do you think about getting more Londoners to think about those?
Yeah, I think that the point that you raise is so important. Learning from other cities who experience temperatures when our experiences is so important, and a lot of these measures actually should be done at the design phase rather than retrofitting later on. We've got to retrofit as well at the design phase in relation to how you design roofs, shutters, height of rooms, to make them cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter is really important. So yes, we are looking at what more we can do, and I mentioned just one example that you referred to in relation to planting more trees. So there's cooling areas. You'll have been to many squares in Europe where there's these great trees which provide shelter in those squares. We need to be doing the same. But you're right, we need to be thinking about shutters, thoroughfares in relation to homes, wind tunnels and so forth to keep homes cool. We're doing that piece of work in relation to London Plan, SPGs, but also guidance to, I mentioned in my answer, early years, schools, care homes and the like.
As well as schools and care homes and planting regimes, do you think we're communicating to business enough on this issue? Because one of my concerns is about the use of air conditioning as the air temperature starts to rise, and instead of looking at building energy management systems, that people just flip the switch on aircon, including and especially in offices.
Well, air conditioning is a good example of retrofit, because you provide the air conditioning because the way the building was designed, nobody thought about when you're designing the building, how can we do stuff to help with the temperature, whether it's in winter, heating, summer, air conditioning. And so, yeah, we are looking into this. So there is a number of pieces of work. You mentioned the London Climate Resilience Review. There's also a London Climate Change Partnership, and also we've got a programme which we're supporting financially clean tech companies in relation to what they can do in terms of innovation. It's the Better Futures programme. But you're absolutely right in relation to things you can do at the design phase, particularly with businesses. Businesses and homes are the two key areas in relation to this issue, to support them in relation to not relying upon something that's really takes a lot of energy, carbon emissions, but a lot of that can be done by design.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for your leadership on this issue and also for your leadership in C40. Thank you, Chair.
Next is Assembly Member Dr. Sahota, and it concerns the implementation of Right Care, Right Person.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the question. Right Care, Right Person is a national operational policing model developed by Humberside Police and backed by the Home Office and National Police Chiefs Council. It aims to improve outcomes for individuals requiring mental health services by changing the way the emergency services respond to calls for assistance involving non-policing issues, including mental health. I'm confident that the necessary partners, including across health, policing and local authorities, are working together to deliver the best outcomes for Londoners. This includes work with operational partners to develop improved care pathways for people experiencing mental health crisis and the implementation of a threshold to prompt police call handlers to check whether a police response is required or whether the person's needs may be better met by a health or care professional. The MPS will still attend incidents where there is any risk to life or a crime has been committed or about to be committed. The MPS convenes the Right Care, Right Persons Partners Board, attended by the NHS and other health and care partners, which has established several subgroups to work through operational details ahead of implementation on the 31st of October. This joint working is reflected in London's Mental Health Crisis Care Concordant, which was endorsed by the London Health Board this year and launched by the Right Care, Right Person Partnership in July.
Thank you for that reply, Mr. Mayor. In October 2022, the Royal College of Psychiatrists published research into mental health waiting times and found that 23% of patients had to wait more than 12 weeks to see a consultant psychiatrist. 43% said the waits had made their mental health worse. 78% of mental health patients sought help from emergency services, including 12% go to A&E and 7% called 999. Waits can be longer than 6 months for 12% of cases, while 6% of patients wait for more than a year. The NHS is in a constant state of stress, and we're coming to winter months, which will add even greater pressures on the NHS. Are you concerned that the approach being taken will put additional pressures on the NHS in London, and London is different from Humberside?
Yeah, there's not a lot that the member asked that I disagree with. So he's right in relation to the challenges in mental health. He's right that this may cause challenges to them further. One of the reasons why the Met Police Commissioner was so concerned to have Right Care, Right Person in London is because of the police resources being used on what is mental ill health. And actually, when you think about those with mental ill health and their families, you're criminalising an issue that is a medical issue. And the right thing for that person, is the right care, is a mental health practitioner rather than a police officer. Because of the long waiting list, what should be an issue that's less serious becomes a crisis, leads to the person becoming distressed, often can lead to the police being involved and sectioning rather than getting the healthcare they need, often taken to a police station rather than a hospital or a GP's practice, but also a police officer or two police officers staying with that patient for a number of hours in A&E whilst the right health practitioner goes to help that person. So, yes, of course, I understand the additional pressures on an already strained NHS, but, I think it's not right for the patient, their family, or the police, for the police, becoming by the back door, either, inverted commas, I don't mean this in a pejorative way, babysitters or health practitioners where they're not trained to do so.
Yeah, and I agree with you entirely, Mr. Mayor, that the police should be doing police work and the health services should be looking after the patients. My concern, of course, is that as a practicing GP, is how is this going to be communicated to the practitioners out there, because they are concerned about what the impact of this is going to be. So whose responsibility is that to issue the clear communications and the care pathways and the guidelines as we implement the new system?
He's spot on. What cannot happen is people fall through the cracks, even though there's best of intentions, because of lack of joined upness. And we saw care in the community in the 80s, where very good intentions take people out of these horrible hospitals where they're institutionalised, put them in the community, led to lots of problems because of lack of investment and falling through the cracks in relation to many of those people who were supposed to be cared for in the community. I think to give credit to the police and partners, there's been a delay in start date. It was going to be, as you remember, August. It's now going to be end of October 31st. There is a board that's been set up to address those very issues. Clearly the triage is important when it comes to call handlers, but also it's important to make sure there are people there to pick up the sort of issues that we are being talked about. And so those are the conversations taking place in the board that's been set up. All the right people are there, councils, the NHS, which includes those representing GPs, hospitals, mental health establishments and so forth. So, and that's some of the things that's going to be worked out even more so over the course of the next 7 weeks.
I mean, that's very welcome, Mr. Mayor, but I just want to make sure that there is a communication strategy which underpins that, so that people who are on the ground are practicing, so they know exactly what's happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move on to Assembly Member Berry, who's asking a question about systematic discrimination in social housing.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. For a long time, our city has been held back by structural inequalities that mean that too many Londoners struggle to lead happy and healthy lives. We know that Londoners from ethnic minority backgrounds or who have a disability are disproportionately affected by poor quality housing. Providing more Londoners with access to a good home can help alleviate poverty. My strong track record on affordable housing delivery plays a vital role in addressing these systemic inequalities. While I've been Mayor, City Hall has consistently broken records and hit ambitious targets to build genuinely affordable homes in the capital. I delivered on the target set by the government to start work on 116,000 genuinely affordable homes for Londoners by March this year. The Quality Impact Assessment for the Affordable Homes Programme 2021-2026 outlines the ways the programme benefits those who may otherwise struggle in our overheated housing market. For example, the decision to prioritise social rent benefits those most likely to be negatively impacted by poverty and high housing costs, including people from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds, deaf and disabled Londoners and younger Londoners. How social housing is occupied is, of course, instrumental to the impact it can have. I do not have a statutory role in determining how affordable housing is allocated. I did, however, publish a key worker list in 2021 to be used by social landlords to help allocate intermediate housing. Over 1 million Londoners are key workers, and women and people from ethnic minority backgrounds are overrepresented in this group. Generally, social housing allocations are made to those most in need. City Hall analysis found that around half of those moving into social housing were previously homeless. New tenants are more likely to be lone parents or female-headed households. A larger share of households in this sector are headed by someone from an ethnic minority background, reflecting higher rates of homelessness and overcrowding amongst these groups. We also ensure that we use our funding as leverage to reduce inequalities. My Affordable Housing Homes programme introduces 5 equality strands that must be met as a condition of funding. Our investment partners are also expected to develop, publish and implement an equality, diversity and inclusion action plan for their organisation and must provide my team with annual updates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Now, today I wanted to raise the issue of the potential for systemic discrimination in the allocations processes. And I know you've just said that you don't have a statutory role, but bear with me because I think there is work that you should be doing. And this comes for me from 9 years of work as a ward councillor and as an assembly member, casework and scrutiny work, where I just feel like I've seen too many red flags on this issue. I do get the impression that there is an overrepresentation of certain groups who are seeking help because the processes have failed them. I was approached by a group of Somali women from Tower Hamlets recently who very much thought this, brought me lots of evidence of where they felt like they'd been let down by the process, and I've exchanged letters with the Mayor of Tower Hamlets about this. He seems to be taking it quite seriously. In my own borough of Camden, the internal auditors did a look at the processes, not the outcomes, but the processes for allocating medical points. And again, they found significant failings, limited assurance, which is quite a serious audit conclusion. So obviously, I can't do that work myself to look across London to see if there's a problem, but I do feel like that is something you might be taking an interest in. How do you feel about that? Do you feel like this is a concerning issue? Are you feeling those same red flags that I am?
I've got to be quite clear. Of course, we do over and above in relation to other parts of the country with our housing partners in relation to ensuring they've got the right plans in place, equality, diversity, inclusion plans before we procure contracts. I simply don't think it's either realistic or sensible for City Hall to be involved in matters that councils do. We've got to be realistic about our resources, where the resources come on the checks and balances. There are processes in place in relation to ombudsman, in relation to public sector duties, in relation to claims of direct and indirect discrimination. I think we've got to be realistic about the scope of what a administration in City Hall can do when you've got 32 boroughs plus the City of London, plus the G15,
so
plus the smaller HAs.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And there was a really good report done by your housing team, and I brought it to you because I'm not sure which team this goes under, to be honest. This report, Housing and Race Equality in London, looking at the secondary data. This was done pre the census, and some of its conclusions are very much that more research needs to be done. It particularly notes that the broad categories of Black or Asian are not sufficient to identify some issues. It talks about doing more qualitative research, including the experiences of people on the ground. Are you pursuing further work along these lines? And can I speak to the people who are doing it? If so,
so we from City Hall do a number of research notes. I think you may be referring to the housing research note.
Yeah.
And so I'm more than happy for the member to speak to the team that does the housing research notes. But actually, that if we're honest, tells us stuff we already know. You and I both know there are challenges of systemic issues.
But it's the question of how what contributions there might be from process to that, on top of the much wider societal inequalities that there are.
I'm more than happy for the member to speak to the team. A lot of the team's work is, because it's, frankly speaking, more realistic desktop work, and so I'm more than happy for the member to speak to the team involved in doing that.
Okay, the research note does talk about doing work with people, and I can see how peer research might be a really good way to tease out some of this. And in terms of your statutory role, just to make the case, which I have been talking about for some years, that there should be a more unified allocations process across London. More consistency would be fantastic for people who end up changing between boroughs, and if there was a consistent process, then this chamber would be able to do more to scrutinise and potentially improve it. But that is all of my time, and I hope that we can speak about this again soon.
Chair, I'll take that as an action in relation to the research team speaking with the member.
Thank you very much. At some point I should have to read this. Will the Assembly agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in accordance with the provisions of Standing Order 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Are we agreed? Thank you very much. The next item on the next question is from Assembly Member Polanski, and it concerns a police raid on Ridley Road Market.
Thank you. Policing in London is the operational responsibility of the Met Police Service and the Commissioner. The MPS has informed me that on The afternoon of Friday, 21st of July, police officers from the Safer Neighbourhoods teams across Hackney, along with the Hackney Town Centre teams, conducted 8 simultaneous searches of business premises contained within the Ridley Road Market. Each of these searches were covered by an individual warrant issued under the Misuse of Drugs Act. The police made 6 arrests for drug offences and seized a large quantity of drugs. All 6 individuals were additionally arrested for possessing offensive weapons. I understand that the operation was conducted following growing concerns from residents about drugs in the local area. The Hackney Safer Neighbourhoods Inspector spoke to Save the Ridley Road Market campaigners, Hackney Council and local councillors to address their concerns. The MPS Safer Neighbourhoods teams are committed to responding to concerns from residents and communities about antisocial behaviour and crime issues that occur in their wards. This local policing operation was an example of the action the MPS is committed to taking in response to these genuine community concerns. Following the searches, Ridley Road has seen an increase in presence from Hackney neighbourhood officers. As well as providing reassurance, this approach aims to keep local people in touch with their police following an incident like this. In more general terms, the police play a vital role in tackling serious crime, and both the Commissioner and I are committed to strengthening the Met Police Service response to the organised criminals behind the drugs trade, drug-related violence, neighbourhood crime and antisocial behaviour. Local policing is particularly important in this regard, and the Commissioner's new Met for London plan aims to provide the strongest ever neighbourhood policing. This sets out how neighbourhood policing will be reinforced, including by working more closely with communities and partners to address their local concerns. This is one part of a series of reforms to the MPS being led by Sir Mark as Commissioner to ensure Londoners have the police service they deserve.
Thank you. I want to really look at the very human impact this raid has had on the communities. Now, Ridley Road Market has been there since the 1880s. It initially served Jewish communities, and then as times have changed, now serves or is run more by diverse black communities. Now, when I went there last week with local ward councillor Zoe Garbutt, we went to speak to the traders so I could hear them, hear the stories for myself. And they spoke about everyone getting handcuffed, whether you're a worker, whether you're someone who was just in the shop. They talked about people who were just near the shops, who were physically restrained and handcuffed. Some of these people were handcuffed for hours. And when they talk about what this raid was like, traders I spoke to said, and I quote, "The police vandalised the place, they said the raid was traumatising, and they said it was brutal." What do you make of these reports?
Well, Chair, I'm not sure I can comment on an operational matter where the member rightly is raising issues raised by some of the residents and traders, but it really is a matter for also understanding what the police perspective is, which I simply, more than what I've set out, I don't know. If you just imagine the number of operations taking place across our city, as I understand it, arrests have been made, investigations are ongoing. I can't really comment about the specifics about how people were treated or mistreated.
Yeah, I'm understanding you can't speak about the specifics, but I'm just talking about this in the wider perspective of the local community and the impact that they feel that this has had on them. The point is, there's a total disconnect between what the Met thinks is good for the community and what the community knows is good for them. And as well as the traumatising and brutal actions of the police that day, this has also had a real effect on trade too. They've said that people are scared to come back to the market. Lots of customers they've just not seen again since that raid happened. And they don't feel like this has come out of the blue. This is a wider systemic issue of gentrification, of systemic racism in our institutions, and just a real mistrust in both in politicians and in the police. And they don't feel that people understand their community or are willing to fight for it. Do you understand the wider impact this raid has had on the community, and do you think the Met does too?
Well, I'm well aware whenever there's a high visibility police incident, it could be a stop and search, it could be an arrest, it could be a raid, it is distressing, not just for the person involved, but for people watching. All I'd say in a respectful way, I just don't know enough about what happened in Ridley Road Market, is often when you're a member of the public and you're traumatised, you don't know the full story. And one of the things that this Commissioner has tried to do is to, go and engage with communities, listen and respond. I think there has been 32 roadshows, many of them led by the Commissioner, just doing just that, because he's cognizant of the impact of some policing matters. So, and so I can't talk to the context of the trauma to those around Ridley Road Market, but of course I appreciate, policing by definition has an impact negatively on individuals and others. My understanding from what I've read out and from the briefing I've received is that the warrants that were obtained from the magistrate were obtained as a consequence of concerns raised by members of the community about criminality. That's what led to a warrants being obtained. There was the execution of the warrants, and now we'll have to wait and see how the criminal process pans out.
Thank you. I appreciate what you just said here, that you're recognising the trauma that this has had on some community members, and many of those members have now not been convicted of a crime and are not, were never suspected of a crime. And you also said that there's more officers, neighbourhood officers turning up, but actually officers are not reassuring to these people. That visibility is actually making the trauma worse. Would you commit to going, or to commit Deputy Mayor Debbie Weeks-Bernard to go and speak to the traders, just to be able to reassure them and hear their side of the story? Because I appreciate you can't know the specifics, but how will you ever know them unless you have these conversations?
Well, listen, I'm very happy for the Met Police Service, City Hall, to look into this matter. Just word of caution.
The police service are the problem here. That's what I'm saying. They'd like to speak to people who are not part of the police service.
Just a word of caution. I mean, it's simply not practical for the Deputy Mayor, me, or the Commissioner to go and respond to every single time there's a concern raised from members of the community.
So they're not important enough.
I'm afraid the Green Group is now out of time. I apologise. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you. I just wanted to, off the back of Assembly Member Polanski's question about Ridley Road and the police raid, refocus our attentions on the fact that that particular neighbourhood is one which is really, that market is very important to not just the economic but the cultural life of that particular part of Hackney. And as a member of the Police and Crime Committee, really proud to represent a community like Dalston, which is majority black. And I know that there are tensions about people that have been there for a very long time and people that have moved into the area. One thing I do want to focus on, though, is that at the Police and Crime Committee here, we talk excessively about black communities being under protected and over policed, and I can only speak from the perspective of somebody who has been to the sessions that Sir Mark Rowley has held in the borough, and some of that was about reassuring people that the local police, with the new borough commander, Mr. Conway, and other officers, that they are there for the whole community and aren't just there to be seen when something bad happens. Now, my understanding of that particular incident is that it's something where it's been one of a series of requests by people that live in the area, as well as some traders who will not come forward publicly to a session like that because they are really concerned about the impact of crime and specifically of drugs on the neighbourhood. There are schools in the area, there are residential estates, there are private housing, a very mixed community of people. And I just want us to maybe your reflections on what we should be doing to, off the back of that, to be the police to be building trust, because I would hope that you are also behind making sure that police are able to rebuild trust with the community. This is a step in making sure that the police are building trust, but also are policing the neighbourhood when really, really serious, deep-rooted issues are being addressed, and that was part of the intervention.
Chair, can I, through you, thank the member for her question, the way she put it. And can I just say this? I simply, for reasons that I hope your colleagues will realise, I can't speak to what happened in Ridley Road Market in the detailed way that the member is suggesting indirectly that I do. But in general terms, look, I've met too many victims of crime who are black. Just too many. And so there's an issue of disproportionality in relation to the impacts of crime on black Londoners. And those victims of crime, do want a police presence. And I make the point in a gentle way. It's a general point, but I know it's not easy to get a warrant. There needs to be evidence in relation to persuading a magistrate to receive a warrant. And also I recognise often it's difficult for people to come forward and report things to the police. One of the reasons why the Commissioner and I are so keen to have neighbourhood officers is for these officers not to just be there when things, in inverted commas, go ugly, but to be members of the community, to engage, to provide reassurance, to get information. And so there is a safe conduit for that sort of information to be passed to the police, so policing action can be taken, because it can't be right that some parts of London are no-go areas for the police, particularly when we know there can be areas where victims are disproportionately affected. And so I say that in a sensitive way, not in any way wish to be disparaging to anybody in the market or anybody who feels strongly about this issue. This Commissioner has spent a lot of time in relation to the turnaround plan, the New Bet for London plan, listening to Londoners, responding and engaging, dealing with the cultural issues inside the police service. I'm committed to providing the funding to have more bobbies on the beat. Massive austerity affecting our community over the last 13 years. We want those police officers to be the right police officers, in the right culture, the right institution. And as long as I'm mayor, I'll endeavour to do just that.
Thank you. There being no other questions, I think it's okay, Mr. Mayor, now for you to go. I'm aware of an amendment to the standard motion and a request that there be an adjournment to consider that amendment. Therefore, is 5 minutes sufficient for people? 5 minutes. Adjourn for 5 minutes. Back at whatever
1:03 p.m.
1:03. Thank you.
don't know what. I mean, is it going to be circulated?
I think. I think we're at a position where an amendment is going to be proposed to by Assembly Member Best. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, and I won't stand. I don't have a doctor's note, but I know a good doctor if you need. I think that so. In relation to what's been tabled, I'd like to make an alteration, and so I can read that out to the Assembly, but the Assembly may also feel that they want to. I'm sorry, take a break to see that full text. So the alteration I'd like to propose to the amended text before you is after the first paragraph to write ULEZ and LEZ.
LEZ.
LEZ. And then in that second paragraph to add a sentence that reads, the Assembly recognises the value of scientific method, evidence and analysis in informing policy and supports the independence of scientists to work freely and without undue influence.
Yes, like that.
Do members understand that alteration? And sorry, and finally, in the final paragraph, to delete these reports and replace with these allegations.
Good.
It needs to be circulated I mean, I just think it needs to come around in writing. If someone can literally just type it up and email it round at least rather than on paper, but I don't think we can look at something like this just having it read out to us.
Okay, so, am I permitted to adjust so we can get the rest of the business and come back to it?
Yeah, absolutely, Chair.
Let's do that. In terms of timing, it might be a better thing. So we're going to park that for now, and I'll move on to the to a supplementary agenda that has been circulated, which let's get the date of the next meeting out of the way. Okay. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the Mayor's Question Time, which will take place on the 12th of October 2023 in the Chamber at City Hall. That's that out the way. Lovely. There is other business I've considered urgent. There is a circulated
done that.
Supplementary agenda. And to sum it up, and I hope this is legal, it basically removes Assembly Member Hall as a member of the Oversight Committee and replaces it with Assembly Member Boff and adjusts all the appropriate substitutes. Are we in favour of that? Well, I think I'm not even sure you have to be. Anyway, we are now. So if we can then... is that the rest of the agenda? So, we're going to... Yes, so did you... No?
So I was suggesting we adjourn.
Yeah, I didn't want to do two adjournments. Let's adjourn for 5 minutes until the circulated paper. Apologies for all that. Apologies also to people who are watching. It must be very frustrating. Just for 5 minutes. People at home know what we're voting for or against. So, Rebecca, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the Chair has formally moved the motion on the agenda in his name. The motion on the agenda in his name is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked. Assembly Member Best has moved an amendment. A table version of the amendment is in front of you. I understand that Assembly Member Pigeon is about to formally second it. The amendment in full reads, so the following text is to be added after the motion as it stands. The text is as follows. This Assembly notes in particular the answers to the questions regarding emails sent by the Deputy Mayor for Environment urging scientists to alter conclusions in their academic work relating to ULEZ and LEZ. This Assembly believes that in a democracy, scientific and academic studies should always be free of political pressure and interference. The Assembly recognises the value of scientific method, evidence and analysis in informing policy and supports the independence of scientists to work freely and without undue influence. This Assembly believes that such interference risks damaging public confidence in those individuals holding public office and risks undermining any public support both for this policy and future mayoral policies. This Assembly is concerned by these allegations of undue interference and calls for an urgent investigation by the Mayor's Office and GLA into these allegations with a report to the Assembly within the next 6 weeks. If you're content, Chair, we could move to speeches.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best, do you wish to propose the motion? You are entirely entitled to sit down for this.
Thank you, Chair, on both accounts. I know we're often accused of having short memories in this chamber, but I'm hoping that since I gave a speech on this on Thursday, that's pretty fresh in people's minds, so I don't want to go over those same arguments. But I will say today that the motion before you is answering specifically the concerns over the undue influence and looking into those allegations, and to remind people that it doesn't matter if you are for ULEZ, it doesn't matter if you're against, it doesn't matter if some days you're for it and some days you're against it. Everybody should be concerned by these allegations and the scientific interference that are before you, and it is right and proper that the GLA looks into that as urgently as possible, and that we have a clear response for that. And so with that in mind, I hope that everybody will be supportive and unanimously support this text and the motion before you. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pigeon to second, please.
Just briefly, this was an amendment we tried to bring last week, or a version of it, and I think following the questions and answers today, it's really important that we put this marker down. This could be about any topic, not just LEZ or ULEZ. This is the idea that an officer of the GLA or politician has tried to influence scientists and their reports and so on, and studies. So I think it's really important, because this for me is about the reputation of the GLA as an institution. So I really hope we can support this unanimously today and ensure that we have a report that clarifies what's happened, and to ensure nothing like this could potentially happen again.
Thank you. Are there any other speeches? Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for giving us the adjournment so we could discuss this, because it is a really interesting issue, and it's very clear that my fellow members of the opposition wish to continue dialogue about this. Now I've worked as a scientist. I've also worked in the commercial communication of funded science as a medical writer, which brings up all kinds of ethical questions. And I've also worked for a scientific institution supporting and managing the work of scientists being funded by a whole range of different things. I understand completely the importance of recognising that for the scientists themselves, truth and integrity is at the absolute heart of the practice of science and its principles, and that scientists themselves hold this very, very dear. I am extremely wary of any potentially hasty political rhetoric that might undermine the reputation of scientific inquiry. Now, as someone who's also worked for a very, very long time to see the scientific conclusions of climate scientists listened to and not undermined, this is a very existential question and a very dangerous question to be playing with at this time in history. So, we have thought about this very, very carefully. And I'm very, very pleased that everything I've seen in reports around this issue as a whole show that the integrity of the scientists involved was beyond impeccable. I'm very, very pleased this motion doesn't, in its wording, cast any aspersions on those scientists at all. Now, it is right that this institution should look at its own house and seek to learn from its interactions with scientific research, and that is what is being requested here. So we will vote for the altered motion, but we will condemn absolutely any attempts to misrepresent its conclusions by our colleagues.
Thank you. Are there any other speeches? Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, the timing of this motion is something that we can't ignore. It comes 2 weeks after the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone to cover the whole of London. So we know why it is being proposed by the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats and why it's being put forward at this moment in time. This motion refers to an email exchange from 2018, and it is fundamentally incorrect because even though it has now been the amendment has now been amended to say low emission zone and ULEZ, the emails referred to the low emission zone, if they are the ones that Assemblymember Fortune was talking about extensively earlier on today, and this is not the same as the ultra low emission zone. And my concern is that while this might have started off as an accidental mistake and it now incorporates both low emission zone and ultra low emission zone, because that's just been pointed out to the mover and seconder, this mistake first appeared in this motion and then had to be corrected. Now, I think that is deliberate. I think there's been a deliberate attempt to damage public support for the ultra-low emission zone by deliberately conflating the low emission zone and the ultra-low emission zone. And it's ironic that the movers of the motion have been doing the very thing that they've been complaining about, conflating two issues, with the results being that public confidence, if they have any success, would be undermined. Of course, it's completely correct to say that nobody wants undue influence from politicians on scientific advisers. Everybody around the chamber will wholeheartedly agree with that. But politicians and advisers must be able to commission studies and then discuss their findings. Scientific experts themselves do disagree, as it happened in this case. They weren't actually in agreement. That disagreement, discussion and search for the truth is what drives science forward. In this set of emails, world-leading scientists disagreed with the GLA over how this information should be presented. And of course they're free to do that because they are independent. We don't feel, therefore, that we can support this motion because we believe it is a deliberate attempt. It is factually incorrect. It's deliberately trying to conflate ULEZ with LEZ, and also because we don't think that amending the Chair's motion is something that we have all done from time to time. But to suggest that we do this, about investigating something so serious, I think is a misuse of this particular procedure. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. I, too, profess to be a recipient of a lot of scientific papers, and this is why it's a requirement in any scientific paper that you put down who your funders are and where your interests are when the public papers are published, so you have some credibility. And I agree entirely with the first 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs that scientific community and scientists should be free from political pressures. But what I'm really concerned about is that I don't know who has said that they have been pressed upon to produce papers which they aren't appropriate. I don't know who the complainant is in this case, who has made the allegation, who has said they have been politically influenced to give a result which they didn't agree with. I haven't heard who the complainant is. That's one thing. And the second thing is this. If there is a complaint against a member of the Assembly, if there's a complaint against the GLA member, the appropriate person to go to is for the complainant to write to the monitoring officer. It isn't for a political party to come here and make political food of their making. I mean, this is, if there's a complaint, who is the complainant, who has been pressed upon, who is the person who's saying, I have been pressurised by the politician? And secondly, that person, that entity, should go to the monitoring officer, which is the well-established procedures for looking into complaints. They have the authority to do this. Why are we not just doing that? Why are we setting up a new procedure? That's what's wrong with this, and that's why I'm going to vote against this. There's no complainant. I haven't heard any complaint of any scientist saying they have been pressed upon, or they've been interfered with, or they've been pressured to give a report. And secondly, the process is the monitoring officer and not a motion here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Assembly Member Fortune.
Thank you, Chair. I want to start by aligning myself squarely behind Assemblymember Berry. Absolutely right. There's no indication, there is no attack on the scientific body, and it's very precious to me as well that we don't do that. We need informed science, and we need scientists available to work without undue influence, and that's actually the point. So I'm with you in terms of making sure that you don't get that condemnation. It's interesting to hear the responses from the opposition, because I wonder if they've actually read the emails that we got. Assemblymember Cooper referred to the example I made earlier, which is from a couple of years ago. That's absolutely right. But actually, the emails we found go all the way up to the beginning of this year. I've got them in front of me. There's one here from November 21 where scientists at Imperial are getting messages from the Deputy Mayor asking for approval of a press release. Actually, the email here, which I'll send to you as well, Dr. Soti, so you can see them, so you can see the complainants, you can see the exchange. It's all been published in the newspapers, but I'll forward it again. And the response says it's happy to adapt. There's another one here from the 14th of February, where the body we're talking about says that the press office at the university is keen not to contradict one of the reports that's been released, but a suggested change to the press release is sent from the Deputy Mayor's office to them, along with the offer of a friendly interview by David Lammy. That's from February this year. There is clear evidence going back years of a relationship which needs to be looked at, and that's the point of the motion. That's the point of the motion, to make sure that scientists anywhere, when developing policy, are free to do it without political influence or pressure.
There being no other contributors, Assembly Member Best, you wish to sum up?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it was exciting for all of us earlier to see Labour dip their toe into scrutiny in Mayor's Question Time for the first time in a couple of years that I've been here. But it seems that that's no further. And I can actually tell from some of the anger behind those speeches that you understand the issue here. And I totally get why you don't want to confront that. But, I mean, firstly, to address the suggestion that this is factually incorrect and the emails related to just to the low emission zone, just to clarify, that's absolutely not true. They relate both to the low emission zone and the ultra low emission zone. And I can point that out to you here, where it said Ms. Reader has thanked Professor Kelly's team for trying to stop Imperial's press office from releasing the research, and said that she was deeply concerned about the damage the study was doing to the credibility of the Mayor's office and ULEZ. This is in relation to the study by the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department regarding ULEZ in 2019. It refers to both of those studies. I can only say again what I said last Thursday, and I think Assemblymember Berry touched on it quite rightly, is it is so important that we have policy informed and led by science, and that we have to commission those studies, and that's how the money comes through to look into those policies. But of course, if we then have the same people commissioning those studies, putting undue influence onto the people that are making those conclusions, it is only fair to assume that those people will have felt that will be felt pushed upon to come up with a different conclusion. And even if they and even if, as we've said, they haven't, and they will stick by their guns, it is not fair to put them in that position when the same people that are commissioning their study are asking them to alter. It's not fair to put that onto the very scientists that rely on grants and commissioned work to keep their department running and ticking over. I think, again, I'll just say that I'm really disappointed in the Labour group, and I think they're probably disappointed in themselves as well, because when something is so clearly in black and white, when you can quite clearly see something is not correct, and you have to stand and just pretend that you can't see anything because maybe the Mayor's asked you to, I don't know. I mean, that's an awful position to be in. So I'm sorry you feel that way, and I know that you know it's the right thing to do. And I'm glad that at least we have the support to have that investigation for the Assembly today. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I see all those in favour of the amended motion, please indicate.
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 in favour, Chair.
And all those against, please indicate.
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 against, Chair. The amendment is carried.
That being carried, that is the
Can we vote on the substantive as amended, please, Chair?
Substantive as amended. All those in favour of the substantive motion, please.
That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 for, Chair.
And all those against the substantive motion?
That is 10 against, Chair. Again, that's carried.
You could have just run the video back on that, really, couldn't you? Yes, that being said, I think that's the end of the meeting. All business has been transacted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.